What? Don't do that first.
Yeah. All right, so,
All in favor?
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. None opposed. Passes 4-0.
I've got one question before we get started. Is this a special meeting or a workshop?
It's a workshop,
Then you can't vote in a workshop.
but you have to do this to.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so.
Big crowd here. Clarence, you're missing it. We packed the room. It's crazy.
So board, the purpose of this workshop is so that we can be brought to speed on what's going on with our lobbyists.
State.
So, say it
At
again?
the state level.
Right. And we have here, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Mike Horner with Mace Young Consulting.
I'm Doug Bruce with Kalodny Pass. And,
Okay. Well, welcome this morning. So either one can go ahead and get started. We would like pretty much to get a review of what's happened and pretty much what you see right now currently and what you can tell us about what's going to happen. Well, to whatever extent what you see,
Crystal ball style
what you see what's
stuff.
going to come down the line. Yeah.
Well, Doug, if you're okay, just to set the table. So last year was relatively successful. John, numbers, we had a big, long discussion here about two things. We were all sitting around this table. One, capital dollars, and two, SREF. And you remember, we spent most time talking about SREF. So the good news is we got a little bit of capital money in terms of $4 million in a one-time grant district. And two, SREF, you guys now have a free hand. You can waive SREF with a supermajority. So it kind of that excuse is off the table. If there's an issue in construction that you want to waive, you just need to have you get Vince 4 board members to make it happen. So the good news is last year the two things you wanted done, SREF was completely resolved, and capital dollars we made some headway forward. This year we've got kind of a rocky road ahead. Jay is playing waitress right now. Is there any-
I'm listening.
I know,
Mike.
okay.
I'm walking.
It's distracting.
Jay,
Keep you on your
be
toes.
distracting, man.
Mike can handle
So
it.
let me just share with you guys the scenario we've got in Tallahassee right now. In the Senate, the Education Committee Chair is Dorothy Huckel. Dorothy's a great lady, served with her. Dorothy does not have a background in education. As far as I know, I don't remember her ever serving on an
Where does she
education
represent?
committee.
Where's she from?
Volusia. But she's a friend, and I think, and that's good, but she's not bringing an agenda per se to the table, at least not one that anybody knows about. Education appropriations in the Senate is David Simmons, who represents Seminole and a little piece of
I got a
Volusia.
question.
Yeah.
Did Fred Costello lose his election?
He did twice, so
He's done.
Yeah, he ran for Congress, but he was in the House and lost.
Because his wife is on the school board. That's
Yes, he is not.
Okay.
A great guy, but he is not in the legislature.
And a dentist.
And a dentist, he is. So David represents mostly Seminole County, but also a little bit of Volusia. So interesting, in the Senate, you got a lot of Volusia firepower in the Senate. David is
On the upside, Tina Calderon, who, I don't know if she's still the chair of the Seminole County School Board or not, but if she's not, she's the alpha dog on the school board there. Amy Lockhart's the chair. Tina is very plugged into David Simmons, which is a good thing for us if we want to,
Sure.
that's the conduit.
Well, David, Doug and I both have a relationship with David, and David's a great guy. He's got a lot of education background. I think this is his second go-round as Ed Apprope's chair. He's a big deal in the Senate. He was rules chairman last go-round. David may have, one of our challenges with him may be Osceola fatigue. Senator Simmons is a guy that's carrying a lot of water on the sensor project for Osceola County. To make a long story as brief as possible, David had an interest in creating Central Florida Expressway Authority. In order to do that, Osceola had to fold in. He said, you guys need to fold in, you fold in, I'll help you get your sensor project. So a deal was made, and David has lived up to his deal, as last year there was funding given. He's been working, he's been very supportive of sensor. I bring that up only that we go to him for more Osceola stuff. He may be like, do I represent Osceola County or Seminole? So, but a good guy and a friend that we can go to. The big approach chair in the Senate is Jack Latvala, who's also a friend. Many of you all had a chance to get to know him. But once again, some Osceola fatigue there in that he's he's probably the main legislator on the Senate side responsible for getting Osceola the censor money last year. So there's that. The Senate president is Joe Negron, and the biggest challenge schools in general are going to have in the Senate, and maybe not us particularly, but the president's top priority, it appears going in, his public priority is higher education funding. Well, if you're going to put more money into higher education, you got to squeeze from someplace else. And so the education policy under pressure because of that. And the way they structured the Senate this year, they did something interesting in that it used to be you had in the substantive side, you had a higher ed committee and an K-12 committee. Now it's all one, the Dorothy chairs. But there was only one education appropriations committee, which is the way it is in the House. Now there are two education appropriations committee, at K-12 education approps and a higher ed education
Are there any
approps.
crossovers of people on both committees?
Maybe, but what will be interesting is when they dole out the allocations, it won't be that David Simmons will be trying to decide where to pull from, wherever. The Senate president will decide how much money each of those gets. So that's my way of delivering the bad news of there'll be a lot of pressure on K-12 dollars in the Senate because of that. In the House, we've got the House, the big headline is Miami when it comes to education. The Education Committee Chair is Mike Belecka, good friend, good guy. Mike is a big charter school proponent. So that will be something to consider.
Where does Eric Fresno fit into all of this?
He is now doing government affairs and
So he's not in the House
businessman.
anymore?
He's out of it.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
he turned
I didn't realize
out.
he wasn't in the House, okay, thank you.
Yep, so education appropriations will be, the guy who will replace the role that Eric had, is not been named yet. The House has kind of run a little bit on their own calendar in terms of naming subcommittee chairs and committee members. Hopefully that'll come out either tomorrow or early next week. But everyone anticipates that Manny Diaz from Miami, Mike Black is from Miami, Manny Diaz is from Miami. Manny Diaz will probably be what Eric Fresno was, the ed approach chair. Now that good news for us, he's a friend, I know Doug's close with him, but most importantly, he and Representative LaRosa are very close. They're very close allies, and so having him in that position will be good. And then the full approach is Carlos Trujillo.
Also from Miami.
Also from Miami. Very conservative. And so money will be tight all around. Doug could talk a little bit about that in a second as well. And then lastly, the Speaker of the House, Richard Corcoran, is a big charter school guy. So you've got a lot of Miami firepower, and you've got a lot of charter school interest coming from the House. And from Trujillo and Corcoran together, there is a big lockdown on special projects, on pet projects, on bringing money home, so kind of the thing we got last year, I'm not saying that won't happen, but it is going to be much more difficult, and if you want to, we can go into the new structural obstacles towards that. So that's the Tallahassee landscape. In Osceola County, we've got some interesting challenges with our delegation in that they're all great guys, but because of redistricting, we're not as muscular as we maybe once were. So one, we got Michael Rosa, who clearly understands the school district's issues, was helpful last year, wants to be helpful this year. Doug's talked to him several times about us. I've talked to him several times recently about us. He wants to help. He understands. He's a friend. And Mike, we fully anticipate he will chair something when subcommittee chairmanships come out. I would be floored if he chaired an education committee, but he will be in a leadership role so that's good.
Mike,
Yeah,
Kelvin and Tim, we're having dinner with Mike and Holly this Saturday night. They're joining us Saturday night. Go ahead.
good, and so he can tell you where I screwed this up. So Neil Cumby.
I'll do that for you, Mike.
Oh, I have no doubt. So Neil Cumby, also, I expect will be a subcommittee chair. Great guy, effective legislator, but has very little of Osceola County, is very much a Polk guy. I know that many of you have relationships. I know, Tim, you've got good relations with him. Jay, you've got a relationship. I mean, Ricky knows him. He's a great guy. I mean, but, you know, Osceola is not his primary thrust.
Well, he just has celebration, right?
Only
And
celebration.
he is fond of celebration.
Good. Who isn't? Then you've got John Cortez in the House, minority party member, which will limit his effectiveness. And then in the Senate, we've got a freshman minority party member in Victor Torres, which will limit his effectiveness. And so the big takeaway is that in the Senate, we will be relying on the kindness of strangers. We will be relying on, if we want to make moves similar to the concept we talked about last year, we're going to need Kelly Stargill to help us. And Kelly doesn't represent Osceola anymore, but I know she has
an old friend.
Yep, she's a friend, and she's got a soft spot for us. She's chairing F&T. We were hoping she might wind up chairing an education committee, but she's chairing finance and tax. But I imagine she'll be on education committees. But
Mike,
yeah,
what's Victor Torres' legislative background?
he was a House member.
Okay.
He served 2 years in the House.
Elected without opposition.
Yeah,
there.
in the House. He's, works.
So this isn't Tallahassee? 'Cause I don't know him.
Yeah.
I just don't know him.
He's, I don't know that he's going to be a player right away. We're going to miss Darren
He's a senator.
Soto.
He's still a senator.
Yes,
Yeah, once
he
we-
is. And Darren Soto will be missed. I mean, Darren was in the minority party, but he was effective. He
Yes,
was
he
always
was.
effective in the House, and he's effective in the Senate. And, but we're going to, listen, we're going to need to educate Victor and give him a little bit, just to be realistic. When you're a freshman minority, any senator is a senator, and they're all their votes, and there's only 40 of them. It's that they can
Any
only.
of those are.
Can I interrupt you for just a moment?
You may.
Just help me understand how, on these topics of education, how this partisanship that you're describing to me plays out in effectiveness.
Sure. When we're talking right now about money, but if you're talking about anything, is that if you're in the minority party, you're not going to be chairing anything. There's one Democrat chairman, I think, in the Senate. That's chairing, two. Yeah, Mumford,
Yeah.
two. But it's when it comes down to it, and it's everything is about leadership races and who's proven. So if you're getting to pick who is the Senate president, who's in leadership, and it's time to decide we're going to give out money.
But it doesn't explain your earlier comments. You said that Darren Soto was effective, and all of these things that you're saying about chairmanships doesn't apply, yet he was effective.
Darren was the exception. He was the exception that proved the rule. Darren would work with Republicans. He didn't throw a lot of bombs. He was a bipartisan player. When I was in the House, did several bills with him. Many Democrats don't operate that way. He had a good relationship with Republicans. There are Democrats that are more highly partisan. I would put Mr. Torres potentially in that category. Mr.
Let me go
Torres.
ahead and ask you a little bit more then.
Okay.
Just tell me what is the main difference when it pertains to education policy as to why there's a difference in the partisanship. Why would that make a difference in advocating for
One's in
public
charge,
schools?
one's not.
Yeah, but the goals got to be the same.
Yeah.
In other words, you see where I'm coming. I understand the basics.
I know what you would like it to be, but that's not the reality. The reality is, the legislature.
What's the biggest difference then? What is it? Funding? Is that what he's talking about?
Power is that you have influence. That if you're in the majority party, you have more influence in how things will go forward. Be it from a bill.
So is the majority party? I'm sorry. So is the majority party?
Philosophically?
No, Jules. So is the majority party right now advocating to improve our public education and bring more dollars?
But everybody has different ideas on what's
Okay, but hold on a second.
okay.
We're talking about here public education,
Okay.
K through 12 funding for
Okay.
the most part.
Right.
my question is right now, the majority party is going to be amenable to improving
Charter
our funds.
They love improving education, yes.
Okay.
They want to improve education.
All right, so part of that means that, we need increased funding, correct?
That
So we
wouldn't
should-
be their idea.
Okay, so all of these great people that everybody you describe with great, you prefix them, they're not gonna help us get more funding?
Some may. I think that if you're in the majority party, I'll give you a contrast. Let me give you a contrast which might make it easier. Our delegation a few years ago had Mike Herodopoulos, who was the Senate president. It had the TED chair. It had two other Republican majority partners that had chairmanships. You're in a position to generate dollars and dramatically influence policy. When you've got a delegation where we will have one individual that lives in Osceola County that has a chairmanship, that is a challenge. We have less stroke, and part of what happened with redistricting, it's probably a good thing, but the counties are not nearly as divided. And so instead of having
Hold
seven
on.
legislators.
It is a terrible thing for Osceola County. I just want to say.
Right.
I'll put that on the record.
Well, thank you. Thank you for helping. Let's go ahead and put some things on the record here. It's not everything, because I hear all of these great people, and all of a sudden I see a lot of pessimistic view
Excuse me.
in funding. Yes, Mr.
Excuse me, Chairman. They are very great people. They're very,
But the reason I said that is because I know they are great people.
Yeah.
Everybody who wants to serve and who wants
well,
to
one of
put-
the differences.
But does it translate into helping us get
Yeah,
more
well,
funding?
one of the differences is just knowing how to be effective in that process. Darren Soto had done 6 or 8 years in the House. He was a senior member of the Senate. He had the opportunity to build relationships, trusting, mutual respect, and understanding how to get things done. And it's very personal. Well, the way that you kind of maneuver and get things done up there. Unfortunately, Senator Torres just hasn't had that kind of experience and the opportunity to learn how to be more effective. He's going to have a lot of help. We're going to do everything we can to help him be effective. He's going to want to be effective. Osceola County is very important.
Hold on, let me clarify my comments,
Go on.
and my terrible comments. It's only because I look at, no, I just want to say this.
Go.
I look at how well that I believe Denise Grimsley represented Southern, St. Cloud and Southern Osceola County, and I think she was an outstanding leader, an outstanding person, still is an outstanding person.
So I imagine that in terms for public education, she was in the forefront of fighting for more funding.
But
I think here's one of the issues I would raise to you, Kelvin, and that's why I said I think you're talking philosophically. You're making an argument that the solution to everything is only going to come through more funding, and that is one of the key differences between the different sides of the aisle, that money is not necessarily going to be the solution to everything. There's other reforms and other processes that we put in place to continue to improve education, not just funding. Funding's a piece of it, and obviously we want to talk about how do we make sure that we get what we believe we need to fulfill the obligations we have not only to our community but also to honor the mandates that have been placed on us by the state. But if we solely focus on it's all about the money, number one, our narrative is very wrong. It's not going to translate to the leadership that we need it to translate to. And I would submit that their philosophy isn't necessarily a wrong philosophy. If it's just about money, then why don't we just create a $6 billion budget for the school district and see how it works? That's not going to solve it all.
All right, here's it. You're incorrect, by the way, in assuming that you reduced it to that, and that's not even close. The reason that we're bringing up funding is because it is really lacking. It's not because we want more than, we don't have what we need to really accomplish the mission of educating our youth. And we're, by the way, among the states, we're at 47. I'm among the lowest. So it's not, this is not actually philosophical. I wish we could get to the point where we could be philosophical about it to say, well, we have adequate funding, and if we had more, we could accomplish this, which is what you're trying to argue, but it isn't even close. What we're talking about really here is the fact that we've never been able to pay our teachers enough money, first of all, among the lowest paid in the country. And say again?
He wants to comment when you're
Can
done.
I get, I'm sorry,
Oh, yes, Paris, absolutely. So So, with all due respect, that's, that was you have a very reductionist response, and it's not that. It's not about money solves everything. It's about, do we have enough just to do what we really need to do? In other words, we're not really getting there. Our students are not really competing on a global scale. So we're not even getting to the point where, what could we do more with it? In that point, we could have the philosophical discussion, and maybe money there is something that is a little bit more fungible with other forms of improving education. I agree there. So here we go, all right? We have a political climate right now that is not going to go towards funding. And that's really what it is. And no matter who gets along with what, how's that going to change? Are you going to be able to persuade enough folks so that we can actually get the kind of funding that we need?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah. Okay. Then we can go on to the next topic, like almost.
I think we need to explore how to attack budget.
Well, and let me offer this as well, because it's important at the same time. This board hasn't necessarily identified that funding is our top priority. So you're asking him a question, which is a fair question to ask, but at the same time, we need to have a conversation. Are there policy things that we want to work on that maybe funding isn't going to be what we get this year? Maybe we understand that isn't necessarily the case. He alluded to at the beginning the loosening up on SREF regulations. That ends up saving us money. That ends up getting dollars for us if we figure out how to leverage that properly. So what my point is, let's not just go to the extent to say the standard request of the Osceola School Board is always going to be, we want more money. And lobbyists, can you get it for us? The approach might be, we need parity in this area. We need more relief in this area. We need lessening of restrictions and regulations over here. We need more freedom to be able to have greater choice options within our district to empower parents to make good choices for their students' educations. We've got to make that decision as a body before we say to these guys, this is exactly what we want you to chase down.
And at the very least, you should know something, that in every attempt that we have to bring equity with our frontline employees, with our educators, we have always been unable, because that's been the discussion, it's not unwilling, unable to really reward them and compensate them appropriately. So that goes to that.
Mr. Chairman, what I'd like to do, I'd like to finish, let Mr. Thacker have his say, but I'd like to finish this, and I think it will help address some of the.
I just wanted to address what Mr. Weishire was, that is not correct. We have had need for money, and we made major decisions because we did not have it. You need to know that. Okay.
That's your
Clarence?
That's your opinion.
No, that's my observation.
Exactly.
Clarence?
Yeah, okay. I just kind of want to echo Jim said. I agree too, and I've had a conversation with Mike and Doug a little bit. I agree with Kevin too that we need money. But is this a year where we need to find some policy issues that are as important, and maybe some policy issues that in turn would generate money without actually having to say we want money with our hand out? I think the odds of we're not going to get to $4 million again. I can almost guarantee it. It somehow kind of stuck through last year. When we were at the school board meeting a week or so ago, whatever it was, I heard somebody making it about what a horrible thing that was when we got the money and they looked over and saw me and said, I'm not saying anything else about it right now. So there's some work going on in the background, make sure that doesn't happen again. But maybe there's ways to get more money, like I say, without necessarily asking, for money for a specific item. In other words, can you look at the rollback? Are there some things we could do where, quite frankly, it would benefit everybody? It wouldn't just benefit us, but it would help us. The other thing is we did just get a sales tax pass, and while we're helping ourselves, that did give us some relief. And like I say, it gets back to, are there things we can ask for that would give us money without, by the policy, impacting us, not necessarily with a pure request for money? And just in little defense of our lobbyists, I know there's concern on their part that if all they give us is SRAP, and some of these, what I would call softer things that generate money, but that we don't get a check, they're concerned that we forget about them and don't love them. I think that's part of their job and ours to remember what then too, because I think we've got a chance. I think we've got a better chance in the very near future of not being the one always begging for money directly, but finding a way to, quite frankly, ask through policy that makes sense. That it's not we have to hurt half the counties in the state for us to be benefited. I don't think we're going to get there that way right now with the makeup of the legislature. So I just kind of want to throw that out.
Thank you for
Also,
your.
and I've got when we get to that point, I've got a couple, 2 or 3 things on the list that I just want to throw out that we can talk about or look at too. So that's all for now.
So I would like to expand on my answer to Chairman Soto about money. So we're not going to raise taxes. State's not going to. You've got a Republican governor, Republican legislature. It's not going to happen. So it's a set pot. Here are the pressures, and this is why I took your question as globally more money for education, not specifically Osceola County. That's the way I took your question. State revenues are not up. They're flat. So there's not new money to put into anything. Number 2, as I discussed earlier, there is a squeeze coming from higher education. It's a presiding officer priority to put more money into higher education. Typically, when a presiding officer publicly made a line in the sand, this is something I want to do. I want to go bond a couple $2 billion to fund higher education. That money is going to come from somewhere. Remember, the pot stays steady. Now we're going to spend more in one area. Squeezes the rest of the balloon. And because this is coming out of the education silo, K-12 will feel the pressure more than anyone else. And so these are the big themes I was trying to get across. Next is charter schools. In the House, you've got strong pressure to do more for charter schools. The presiding officer is a big proponent, and he appointed a committee chair who's a big proponent. That's not an accident. So when you've got a House that charter schools are a big priority, and a Senate that wants to do higher education, that sounds like a natural trade, right? I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but that's the environment that you're in. And the last one is, to Clarence's point about going in and trying to just get a separate pot, there are environments where that's a thing you can kind of do. Last year was one of them. There are years where this is not a year for that, because the Speaker and the House Appropriations Chair despise it. And we'll see if at the end of the day, there will be some people that will get their special projects. But, what's that?
From Miami.
There'll be some people that get it, but the bar is much higher than it has been in the past.
Sure.
So that's I just want to give you that environment as we're thinking about what we want to go forward. And so I think Clarence got ahead of the curve in a good way. And then the last thing I wanted to say, and then you guys can pitch questions and Doug, questions for staff and for you guys to consider, what is our genuine shortfall? I mean, what is our capital? We're saying we want capital money. Do we have a capital problem, and can we prove it? It's not a secret to anybody in Tallahassee. We just passed a half penny. So you've got an extra $500 million to spend over the next 25 years.
Deferred maintenance.
You've got a lot of extra capital money, and they know that. So can we demonstrate? Before we had a good case, we'd show them this ocean of red ink, and so do we have a problem? Can we prove it? We were an outlier before. We were in a really bad shape. Can we prove we've got a capital
Predicated
problem?
upon what you're saying, if we go for anything, which is not a bad news story necessarily, we're going to go for capital and not operating dollars.
Not necessarily. Now we're talking about. So you've got so capital. We need. But I just want to give homework to think about. And Sarah and I've had this discussion.
Okay.
We need, if we want to talk about capital,
We need a clear
for me to help you, for Doug to help you. I can't. I mean, we both met with Mike LaRosa. I visited with him a couple weeks ago. When we were talking about it. He looked me in the eye and goes, "Do we even have a problem anymore?"
Well, no, that's
and I need to prove that. Well, you could, but he needs. And even if he believes it, we've got to be able to prove it in town. Number two.
Doug, are you representing any other school districts?
No.
Okay.
So number two, a big issue and I need to talk to Mr. Clinch about this, and shame on me, I haven't done it yet. We need to prove that we build schools at an inexpensive rate.
That we can do.
I know everyone tells me we do.
No, you need the data.
We need to be able to show it clearly, because in the House, that is a big issue. Fully expect there will be legislation this year that will put penalties on districts that are building schools over what the state says they're supposed to build it. It is a big issue with the speaker, and it's going to be a big issue in.
And not only are we doing it, we can illustrate it in specific terms versus a similar, a school scheduled to open a year earlier than our high school. That was presented to us, so that presentation.
Having a dog and pony that we can show, and frankly, it's good for you guys to have. When you're showing Rotary Club and they ask about that penny, you can show why you're doing it cheaper. But that's something we're going to need.
No, that's reasonable.
So I'm going to end. I wanted to end on a positive note, and then I'll shut up.
All right.
Positive note.
Something.
So here is something that's good that's on the House side. The House is breaking all the rules. Mr. Diaz, Mr. Trio, Mr. Blecka, they've made it clear the way we've always done it doesn't matter anymore. In Tallahassee, typically, the hard thing to do, we were talking about DCD just the other day, Sarah and I, and well, you can't mess with DCD. You'll mess with this cost differential. That's a sacred cow. The last time they changed that, it was because the speaker designate, Ray Sansom, wanted to change it. That's a hard thing to do. There may be no sacred cows. So things where I had told Mr. Thacker for years he would want to address operating dollars, because Osceola is well, you're not going to mess with FEFP. That's a sacred cow. I think the House, at least, whether they can get it through the Senate, is willing to redo everything. Everything will be on the table. And so we want to be part of that discussion that when they're talking about we're redoing capital, and we go, wait a second, the way we do capital isn't fair. The people of Osceola County are paying 3/4 of a penny of sales tax to build schools, and the rest of the state isn't. That's not fair. When you redo it, we're treating these high growth counties. So the good news is there may be an environment of opportunity, because there will be so much change. If we can be savvy and capitalize on that change, there may be some opportunities to score some success.
Is Manatee and Lee County still seen as high-growth counties?
Manatee and Lee was in the they qualified under our formula last year.
Okay.
Manatee, I don't think they did.
Manatee did last year.
They did?
Yeah,
Okay.
because West Manatee was exploding stuff. The reason I'm asking is, you need to know who your ally, who's in the same
Correct.
boat.
Right.
Because it makes it easier if you have more people
And
paddling.
you're right, Senator
Galvano.
Galvano was
But
very
these are things, because I've got allies I can bring to the table, but I need to know if they really fit the mold or not. So you'll let me know.
Well, and I do think we're going to have to talk about that in light of some recent numbers. That's what they're kind of going to get, because this is information I was going to send to you all as a board tomorrow in the weekly board update. But we got our third count from the state. Good news is there was no proration, which we had fully anticipated.
Great.
We were a little bit under our initial projection when they recalibrated FTE, but we have those dollars in reserve, so that part of it's not a problem. Our growth was 2.5%, 2.55. 1.31 in our traditional schools, 7.69 in our charter schools. So last year, in last year's budget, we only grew by about 100 students in the district schools, but charters had tremendous growth.
Yep.
This year, it was almost even. We grew just a little bit less than the charter
What's the
schools, but it
raw
was
number?
very, very close. She's going to get that,
Okay.
okay? I just have basic notes
Okay,
here.
that's fine.
But if I remember correctly, and John's going to get the
Percentage is
second
different, but
piece,
the number
when you
is the
looked
same.
at per student funding, we were the second lowest in the state. Isn't that what you said in that last email?
So we're 66th.
Yes. Okay, if you look at comparatively to other districts, when it came down to the per student funding, we're the second lowest in the state.
I got a question about that. Are we still, we were in the
So that's
past.
where that operational piece may be a better approach this time in terms of some of the things that Clarence may be wanting to talk about than our capital
Right.
problem.
Okay, Dr. Pace, in the past, relative to that argument, though, there was also, as fuel for it, that we were 66th or 67th also what we spend per student on administration. Because that falls in line with where we are with our funding. are we, and I don't know if that's still the case, but we used to be able to make that argument that we were 66th or 67th and our per student allocation for, because people would say, oh, we're top heavy with them, and you can go right back, and, but the question then is, and I see you're nodding your head, Sarah, so are we 66th out of 67?
I don't think the numbers have come out for the fiscal year 16 yet, but I know in 13, 14, and 15, we were the third lowest, the second lowest, and the lowest in
Okay.
administrative.
So we are typically 65, 66, or 67, so when will you have that 16 number, do you think, Sarah?
We'll come out with it once they get all of
So-
last year's audits
okay, so we don't know
done
when
and
so we don't-
final data from last year.
So we are typically, say, 65th, 66th, or 67th, depending how it's calculated, depending on the year you look at, which is also consistent with our funding and shows we're not top-heavy with administration, which I know you didn't bring it up, Mike, but I've had legislators ask me that question.
Well, if you're going to tackle the operational issue, then that's certainly something you want in your arsenal, is to be able to demonstrate that. Deborah or Sarah, what drives that? Why is Osceola County the second lowest? What's the drive?
We don't have the money. You gotta be efficient, you gotta be frugal.
No. What is the driver on why we're the second lowest funded
The allocation.
district? I know, and this is my ignorance, I know why they're so low in capital.
Yeah.
Why are we doing poorly in operational?
It's the way the FEFP calculation comes out as a result of how many students we have compared to how much money we bring in locally.
So it's because our property values
It's the
are
local level.
low.
Correct.
It's property values,
Is that the
right?
biggest component of that?
Yes.
Property value?
And we're still waiting for global warming where we have the beachfront here.
And,
also.
and that's where
That'll
too,
change
you know,
something.
when Clarence mentioned it's the rollback rate, even though our property values have been increasing, not as fast as other places, but still even relatively so for our county, we directed to levy the rollback rate, which keeps the amount of dollars coming in constant.
Yeah, constant.
So
From
the
a local
property
level.
Our
value
county
doesn't
was
help
one
us
of
that
the
much, right?
hit in the recession with the drop in property values in the state. And now they're not allowing us to start reaping some of the benefits of the increase in the property values. Even though it would save our homes, it's not huge every year. It is increasing at this point, and we're still back at a rate 3 years ago.
What's the
So we're
chance
not getting that
legislation
benefit.
What's the chance that the lawmakers would address something like that?
Well, that was kind of my point earlier, which I would have said a month ago. Slim,
And now it's
I would say that with this house, we've got a fighting chance. Now, when you're talking about making these kind of changes, it may be a multi-year process, but I think it's certainly worth putting on your list to work on operational funding, and let's dig into it. Whether it's very, very difficult, though maybe this year not impossible, to make changes to FEFP. I mean, that's a battleship, and it's tough, but maybe there's a special pot for districts that are in unique circumstances. But I would rather not at this table develop the solution here. I would rather develop the solution, legislative staff's input, so they have some ownership in the solution. So, but I think putting operation dollars on the list.
I think it goes back to Mr. Soto's point about parity, equity. I mean, there's no reason why students in Osceola are
No.
funded at that level when students
No.
in Sarasota are funded at a totally different level.
Correct.
I mean, the FEFP was supposed to take that and bring some more equity to the process.
So let me play devil's advocate because I'm on your side. But if I want to play, but just to give you, so what is the delta? What's the difference between the state average and being 66%? So somebody's got to be 66th.
Yeah.
Somebody's, you know what I mean? I'm not saying it should be us, but
Yeah, if you look
somebody.
at page 2 of this
So what
email-
is the
Yeah.
delta?
But you're right. You just want to know what the delta is between that.
And guys, this is
State
kind of a
average.
mess right now because I'll be putting it obviously in some memo form for you
Sure,
guys
sure,
tomorrow.
sure.
But for today, I'm just showing you what I've been sent to me to gather information. So if you look at page 2 at the top, that question, and this is in response to a media inquiry from Charlotte's son, who's talking about the fact that per student funding is high, and so why aren't teacher salaries high? Well, it's because she's not looking at the full picture. So this is from yesterday's release of the third calc, so this is very current data. The average per student funding is $71.78 per student, and in Osceola, we're getting $68.48.
So that was as of the first calc. I just looked at
Oh,
the
sorry.
third calc numbers that came out yesterday.
Oh, I apologize.
No, it's okay. It's just that the numbers they were using in that request was first calc.
Okay.
But we are $328 below the state average, which is 4.55%.
And that all has to do with property tax. That's
It
the
has to,
operation.
it has to do with the entire FEFP formula.
Yes. Is there a cost of living adjustment in there that makes it go down?
The district cost differential, the DCD that Mike referred
Yeah.
to, we're slightly below a full 1%.
But that's not the big driver. The big driver is the property taxes we
Property
generate.
taxes in proportion to the number of students that we have in our county.
The other piece that's hurt us pretty significantly over the last 2 years is the cap on your weighted funding. So for example, we lost about 300 FTE because we were over capped for ELL students. So because we have more ELL students than we projected, again for a second year, that's recalibrated and we're only paid base funding for them, even though we're required and expected and certainly want to provide the appropriate level of service to help them meet their needs. Then there's some other things that we need to do
Can we-
internally, like for example, McKay scholarships. I'm getting staff to look at that because that's going up. Money that's going from us to private schools
Yep.
to serve ESE students. We've gained another 100 students in that program.
Not to go down too much of a tangent with that ELL, how much money are you talking about because of that?
300 FTE, right? But when that
It's the difference in the weighting, so
Yeah.
they basically don't get the extra weighting.
How much money are we
So it's
talking?
calculating that.
My point is that would be, let's
If
assume,
the majority of our reduction wasn't that.
I get what I'm saying.
just
but
there are
these-
all those pieces and
but-
parts that hurt us.
But what I'm saying, those kind of things are good for Doug and I to know, because let's say there's a big education package, which sounds like the House will have an interest, whether the Senate picks it up, and we put something in that says, if your calculation, you'd have a chance to recoup those dollars. That may not seem like a lot in the big scheme of things, you put a line in that does that, but if that was an extra, $300,000 to Osceola County, that line would be worth putting in. But now, if it's $4,000,
Yeah, maybe.
so
But
we
the
should
bottom
put the
line
juice
is, I
worth
think
the
they ought to
squeeze.
pay us for the students
They
based on
should.
their level of need, regardless of a cap. If we
Right.
have to provide services for ELL students or ESE students,
Yep.
or expanding our CTE program, then why shouldn't we receive that funding?
Right, let's put that, we
Yep.
could put that, we wouldn't run a standalone
Now we're
bill,
talking.
Right.
but if they're doing a bill, that's the kind of thing that we need to know to say, hey, this is an element that could be
We can
addressed.
also look statewide which other counties are sacrificing because of that as well.
So while we're talking about operational, could you look at Volusia and see what they are on the list?
It's in terms of per student
Yeah,
funding.
just curious.
Volusia
Can I ask a
is
And I'll be
question?
quiet now.
2009, which
Can I-
is below the state
Can I ask a
average.
question?
See what
Do we have a
percentage.
measure, and that's, I think Mr. Miller mentioned that the criticism on administrative cost per district. Is there a measure anywhere that ranks the districts between each other on administrative
Yes.
overhead?
Yes, it's
That would-
typically a lag indicator, so I don't know what the number is right now, but we
Yeah.
do. There is a number that comes out every year.
And so
That's
that-
what we were saying, we're traditionally in the lowest.
I haven't seen it in a few years. Yeah,
That
I
would be very
There's a
helpful
ratio.
to us. Because we get that. I had a conversation 2 days with a member, and he said, all the districts, he didn't differentiate, spent too much on
I'm
it.
sure he did, because he didn't know what he's talking about.
Right, well, so if we have the
No, I
facts, I
understand,
can
no, I
show
get
it
it,
to you.
sure.
So, Mr. Chairman, just sitting here with Sarah, we talked at the beginning of the discussion about Volusia County. Got the chairman, got a piece of the brochure. Volusia County is $200 under the average. So we're 328, Volusia's 200. So we're talking about making allies. Maybe there's an opportunity. Normally I would be the one warning you. Doug would be kicking me under the table saying, FEFP, are you crazy? That is the most nuclear. Clarence, if you think that when you show up for the Florida School Board Association and you got a little extra $4 million kicker, if you start messing with FEFP and somebody's ox gets gored, they're going to tar and feather you. Typically, that would be a very difficult thing to mess with. If the House is willing to break some egg omelet, maybe we can talk. Now, Miami is over the state average, but Dade ought to be. I mean, that if anyone deserves it, that's a high cost area. But I think that looking at operational and looking at maybe it's a menu of a handful of those little things like that ELL when you're over your calculation, a handful of those that we can slip in to whatever reform package we're trying to do. But I think that being at the table on operations dollars it's something worth playing in.
Mike, one thing I just want to add on the formula, the purpose of the formula was to provide equity across the state to different districts based on their economic status. And it was also for districts to be able to pay, my understanding, one of the original purposes was different districts to make up the cost differential for teachers where it's extremely expensive to live. But I can tell you, if that's the purpose of that formula, it's not working, because if you look at our starting salaries around us, we're higher than some, and nobody's blowing us out of the water. So, and if you go to, I think Monroe County is the biggest one that gets, 20 grand a student or something versus our 6,700, whatever it is now. Their teachers are not making 3.5 times what our teachers are making. They're making the same sort of thing. So I agree with you. I don't think we should blow it out of the water, but can we look at any of the calculations and say, just based on 10 years passing or whatever it's been, is this calculation really doing what the intent was? And I don't think, to me, this is not about hurting other districts. I think we need to look at, I'm not convinced the funding's not there without raising taxes if we really look at where they're spending the money. That's a different issue.
It's not just administrative cost either. I was listening to a Collier County guy speak at the FSBA, and he was a communications guy. But he said something that struck me. He said, we've got 7,000 employees and 40,000 students. And I went, what? Because we have 60,000 students and we have 7,000 employees. So how does Collier County have enough money to have 7,000 employees? And I'm not saying that's a true number, but maybe that's something we look at. Hey, it seems that Collier County is spending money wisely, but we're doing it for much more efficiently.
And keep in mind, too, that number probably doesn't reflect charter school employees.
And that's what I'm saying. I don't know if this is
We have about 10,000 of
true.
our students
Yeah.
in charter schools,
Yeah.
so they wouldn't be tagged to our employees.
And so maybe that's how that all plays out, but nonetheless.
Not saying that we don't do
Yeah,
a good job of
they've
staffing,
got a
we do.
lot of people working because they've got a lot of money. They spend an exorbitant amount of capital because they have this extra capital they don't know what to do
Well,
with.
Ricky, if you also go to Collier and you look at their district administration
I don't want to
offices-
pick on them either.
No, but it's a good, if you go to the district administration offices compared to this, it's like the Ritz-Carlton. I've been there. It's a beautiful building. They have beautiful offices, but they also, if you drive 10 minutes west and then you go north and south, they've got some of the most expensive real estate.
No, I
in
get that
West to
piece,
get the
but
property
I
tax,
think
and a
that's
lot of it's
where
not
Clarence is coming
homestead
from.
because it's vacation homes
Yeah.
or commercial property, so they're reaping that full
No, I
benefit.
get
But-
that piece.
But no, you illustrate a good point though, relative to the number of students versus number of employees. But it is a different financial calculus than we will ever have here.
So,
Well, when you look at the whole state, the problem are the inland counties, the problem are not on the coast.
Yeah.
So, Clarence, the challenge, and I'm up for let's look at doing something here. But just so you recognize when your statement is, now I don't want to hurt other counties. The problem is when it comes to things like FEFP, it's a zero-sum game.
Yep.
And so when you move up, somebody else moves down.
Yep.
When you get more, somebody else gets less.
Yep.
And it just by the nature of what it is. And somebody's going to be, if we're not 66th, if we go up to number 59, somebody dropped as a result. And when those FEFP runs come out, Doug will tell you that when the first FEFP runs come out, every lobbyist for every school district is running around with that spreadsheet looking at where did my county, and legislators are grabbing that sheet and going, what happened to my county? And they go, wait, why did my county drop? And and maybe even they're getting more money overall, but they don't care because compared to everybody else, and so, yeah, we're 4% less than the state average, and I would argue that's not good, and that's not right. But when you look to where, if we were having this discussion a year ago and we talked about capital, we're what? We're 1,000% less. We were,
Yeah.
so the disparity, 4%, listen, I'd like us to beat the state average. I'm just saying, we ought to do it, and I think we can nibble around the edges, and if they're breaking up the whole system, let's get in there and play. But just recognize people get hurt, and it makes it a challenge. And and last point is,
Did you already go?
I'm gonna circle back around, I know everybody wants to talk. I'm gonna circle back around to Kelvin's original question, and this is what hurts us when we're talking this FEFP, is the horses that we have on our delegation. It's a member-driven process, and if you've got the Senate president in your delegation, then you're not gonna be 66th. When that sheet comes out, the appropriation staff doesn't want to walk up to the fifth floor and show the president or the speaker that their district is at the bottom. They won't be at the bottom. We don't have the Senate president. We don't have the appropriations chairman.
Yep.
We don't even have a full committee chairman. So it's just be aware of the challenges.
Well,
I just want to give you that.
Just
So
real
sorry.
quick, Jay, if you don't mind. One thing, to go back to my comment about having the whole county, now our whole county is reliant on a brand-new minority party member. Instead of having a long-serving other and having some breakups, see, where you say, well, Osceola County has 2 or 3 people carrying its water, as Mike let. Instead, now we have one guy, who's not even from Osceola County, by the way, who's carrying our water, and he's also a minority party member, and he's also a brand-new member. So that goes back to my point of, just
No,
wanted to
and that
briefly
actually is very
say-
clear, and I understand what you're saying. I just wanted you to say it, because we're having this discussion. It's really comes down to this, it doesn't look like, at least in the immediate future, we're ever gonna have that influence. And that's because you have bigger counties. For example, you mentioned Miami-Dade at least 6 times in one of your discussions. And the reason is because that's where the best horses are coming from, to use your analogy.
Quick calculation, the value of that 4.55% decrease over the state average is $20.6 million.
So it might actually be real money. So let me, but Kelvin,
But 4.66 doesn't sound like a lot sometimes.
but Kelvin, I don't want to constantly be disagreeing with you, but I'm going to share this with you. I want to give you.
There was just about stating, let's be objective about this. That's all I'm saying.
Just to help you.
Help me
That's not why Miami-Dade is so strong. It's Miami-Dade, if we were having this discussion 6 years ago, Miami-Dade was not strong. What you've got in Miami-Dade is they had a glut of legislators that all came in at the same time in 2008. They're all seniors now.
Big boys.
They all have risen to the top. Also, the Speaker of the House became Speaker because of Miami-Dade. He was in a 3-way race for Speaker. Actually, a 5-way race, but there were 3 main candidates. He was in 3rd place. The entire Miami delegation, minus 1 member, and they were the biggest block, all came on board for him. He then became Speaker because of them. So he became Speaker because of Miami-Dade. He rewarded Miami-Dade members with key chairmanships, and they happen to be seniors. They're all in their final year. Miami-Dade, 2 years from now, will not be very strong in the House because all these guys are about to term out. And so all these key leaders, so when we sit around this table in 2 years, Miami-Dade's not going to be the muscle. It may well be Southeast Florida. It may be, now, actually Miami will still strong because the speaker's coming from Miami-Dade, Jose Oliva. But what powered him was the class above you gets vote for speakers, more than you need to know. But anyway, my point is,
So we just have to wait.
my point is, and listen, it wasn't that long ago that Central Florida was the big dog. We had Dan Webster and Tony Jennings. There was a time when we had Dean Cannon and Andy Gardner and Central Florida. Everyone else hated Central Florida because all the leadership was coming. Now, all our guys are freshmen in Central Florida. They're actually sophomores now at this point. There's the big glut. Miller, Cortez, La Rosa, all these guys are sophomores. Or juniors. But Miller and Cortez are sophomores. Eisenhower's a sophomore. Plakin's a sophomore. All these Central Florida guys in 4 years. Central Florida will have more strokes. So it's not just Miami. A lot of it is, who's to say that in 2020, in 2022, the Senate doesn't go Democrat? Senate's pretty close. The Senate could I'm not advocating that. So let's say the Senate becomes a Democrat. Let's say the Democrats become the majority party. You're going to be thrilled that Victor Torres is your senator, and you're going to go. Poor Denise Grimsley is sitting doesn't have a chairmanship, and Victor Torres is chairing education of probes. The wheel spins.
It only matters. So it only matters if let's keep it with the topic at hand, how it pertains to the education policy and the funding.
Well, for this year,
so what I'm trying to say is, it's like the fact, whatever. How do people get around to understanding that this is what we need to do? That we need to invest in our public education.
We're not going to accomplish that from Osceola County.
Okay.
What we're going to do is we're going to try
Then
and
that's what
fix
we-
problems like the
But
superintendent
doesn't mean we
mentioned.
don't fight the fight, Colin.
We do.
But there are things you
Judge
can
on, sir.
The key is that we have to build our case. It's the same thing that I argued on 3 years ago when I ran all over the state, and Doug and I and then Mike came on, and we were running around making our case. We can do it through maneuver, or we can do it through merit. The maneuvering is not as likely as we'd like it to be right now.
Right.
The merit
That's
is.
clear.
We need to make sure that we're building the case on merit. When we started talking about how do we get, you'll recall these conversations about how do we create a very picture, not words, not charts, not spreadsheets, not all this stuff, a very clear picture of this is where we are, how we're spending our dollars on capital, how we're building our facilities below average cost, how we're making sure that we have some of the lowest administrative costs, how our funding is below and we're ranked number 66 out of 67. We've got to build that narrative and bring the merit to the table, and that's the only way, in my opinion, that's the only way that this conversation about anything touching FEFP is going to happen. And that was my argument at the beginning. We can't start with how much money do we want. We have to start with what is the policy that we want to take and what is the merit that's going to back up our approach to try to advocate for that policy. My point was the time when it was to run around and say, please let us have $4 million extra dollars, $12 million extra dollars in the original formula. That time was there. We used that as our approach. That time has expired. We got what we can get. Now we've got to readjust. And I think right now, and I just spent a week in Orlando with all the leadership in the House and hearing what's going on the real estate side. The landscape is set. We're not going to be able to maneuver the way that we would typically be able to maneuver. And so the conversation today has to be solely focused on numbers, facts, merit, and then build our policy and our approach around it. That's my
You're
opinion.
100% right. I agree with that 1,000%.
Let's close in prayer. Call it a day.
It was almost how close, yeah, Jay.
In perpetuity, from day one, and to Tim's point, I was born here. I said that yesterday. The argument from Osceola County has been, always has been, and still should continue to be that we need money. We've got to quantify it, obviously, which Mike and Doug went over. But, that's not a new story from Osceola County. It'll never be a new story, and we're always going to be underfunded. And we can pontificate upon the reasons why, but it's just we know why. It's because number one, life ain't fair, and number two, our real estate we are a property rich county, but the rich property we have doesn't generate the revenue that we need, and so it's always going to be somewhat of a catch-22 unless somehow that equation with property flips, and I don't know that it will ever get to that point in Osceola. We haven't yet. So I guess the questions are, number one, okay, our message, your message always is going to be, yes, we need money. We understand there's tools you need to make the argument. Yeah, people are tired of hearing about it, but it's been consistent. It's nothing new. Number two, Clarence brought this up earlier. We've got to look at, number one, what is every school district, and what is an issue every school district in the state has that we can get? That's number one, that we go in together. Number two, what victories can we consider a victory, or do we want, that are not necessarily tied to funding, that are Osceola-centric? Things that don't cost money are typically much easier victories to get because it doesn't cost money, and it's a much easier sell. So, and I don't know what those things should or shouldn't. I've got my own ideas, but fortunately I've got a terrific superintendent with a great leadership team, so they may have some ideas relative to that. But insofar as the money conversation, we can spin this around 1,000 different ways, and no one's going to be wrong, but we are where we are with money, and I don't know that we're going to squeeze anything out. Charters are the darlings right now of Tallahassee, whether we like it or not. So to a certain degree, we're going up to Tallahassee to play defense as much as offense relative to charters and what charters do or don't get. Higher ed, we're not going to fight that battle. And on top of that, this may not be the most popular place to say it, but I don't have a whole lot of heartburn if Osceola gets money for the Advanced Manufacturing Research Center, because I think that is a really good thing for the county.
That will
And I know
raise
that-
property taxes.
And I know, well, that's UCF, and that's the county. There's not going to be a lot of property taxes.
No, but it generally raises everybody
No,
else.
I understand, I understand.
Raise
I
the
understand. I'm talking about that, but the point is, though, that is, that's something that I'm fully in
give us
support
more
of
money.
and is good for us. So, the question backing up is, what victories can we get, do we want to pursue, that are not necessarily tied to dollars we won't get? And I don't know if anyone's got an answer for that.
Living will be higher.
Because dollars, and dollars is something, every one of us needs to always be fighting for money. There's no doubt about it. That is how we start the conversation. But we don't want to walk away from the conversation saying we didn't get money. So let's see what we can get that money is not tied to. I don't know what those answers are.
Deborah, is there any legislative, any substantive concepts that you think we should be pursuing?
Alternative to the FSA for high school graduation requirements, so that we could do the SAT and the ACT. And that's going to be heard in several different counties, but
Yep.
I don't know if the board's supportive of that or not.
Yes.
But there are
Yes,
several school
absolutely.
boards, I think the Central Florida Coalition is doing that. There are
Yes.
several other school boards who are advocating for that.
Okay, so repeat that. So an alternative
So an
assessment to the
alternative to the
FSA.
FSA, a nationally normed test for high school graduation requirements. So in other words, the SAT that we're providing to all of our students in March could be the graduation requirement. It's a test that means something for kids, it measures college and
Okay.
career readiness.
Correct.
So for them to say it doesn't measure the standards, it's
Okay,
crazy.
let me ask you a question, okay. Let's go into the premise that the state's not, that the state is not the sharpest tool in the drawer, okay? And so if we go into that premise, and they want something that maybe isn't, and they want local control, so to speak, but FSA is not it. And ACT and SAT are seen as the boogeyman. And here's the question. If we use something other than FSA, how does that negatively impact the funding that the FSA not-for-profit, which we know is a scam anyways, gets? Because they're going to fight it because they want to protect what they have. So I don't care about the validity. They don't care about the validity. They care about the revenue stream. So the question I've got is, if we go to something alternative, does it negatively affect their revenue stream? I don't know that it does. It shouldn't, but I got to ask that question because that's where they're going to fight it. If they're going to lose money, the people who run FSA, the people who lobbied for it, then so if they're not going to lose money, then it's an easy argument to make.
But we're not talking about doing it away completely, we're talking about doing it away with it at basically 2 grade levels, 9 and 10. You know what I'm saying? So we could still use the FSA for 3 through 8, but the other piece is paper-based testing instead of computer-based
Well, let me
testing.
back up on what you just
Let's
said.
put, listen, I know that Seminoles thing. and
Like
so-
I said, it's something that I think a lot of districts
Right.
are gonna
Well,
advocate
that's good.
for.
That's
So Deborah, I'd like to put both those things, those, kick me in the desk too. Let's put both those things on your list. I think those are both things that we should pursue, and I think with the nature of this House, and I keep going back to the House, because the Senate is much more traditional, nature of this House, FSA's lobbying ability, it will not be as impactful in this House. Doug, am I wrong?
So-
I mean, so we can, these are the type of things where we're saying we're gonna change things up. I think we've got a chance. Because it's a different environment over there. So I think those are both.
I think there's an appetite for
both
both of those, and I think we ought
so
to be
too.
a part of the resounding chorus asking
Right.
for
So
it.
I think putting those on your list is a
Wait,
great
Dr.
idea.
Pace, I want to have this conversation with Dr. Pace in front of the board, okay. I agree with what you said, but we've got to go under the premise. I think we can get that, but I don't think that we can get it and we can eliminate the FSA administration to those high school students, because every student who takes it, they're making money, and we can use the ACT and SAT. The only point, I don't know, if you start taking a piece of it away, while they may not be able to lobby, they can go back and say the contract says X. I'm sure in the contract, there's not a lot of flexibility because they out-negotiated the DOE, which is typically what happens. So, I think that we've got to be prepared that our students would still have to take it, but it can't be weighted like the ACT. I'm not in favor of it. But that's the battle you're going to fight, is now you're taking a percent. Let's say you take 2 grades, when they've got 8 grades, that's 25% of their revenue.
Yeah, but Jay, it's not, I think there's enough of an appetite to minimize testing as opposed to giving kids another test
I agree.
that they don't need to
But
do.
it's a question of a contractual, so so are we prepared to work within an environment where kids, unfortunately, I'm not in favor of it, I'm just pragmatic, where kids are still required to take it, because the state's not gonna pay them for it if the kids don't take it, and they're gonna require that they meet their contractual obligation. I'm sure FSA will do that, where kids take it, but we tell them the ACT and SAT really matters, and we're right, we're doing something that's stupid, not right for kids, but the state doesn't
You
care.
can do that already. I mean, there is a concordant score for the SAT. The whole point is to eliminate that 9th and 10th grade FSA so that kids aren't taking another test.
I hope we can, but now we're talking about cutting somebody's revenue. And when we cut somebody's revenue, they're not gonna go quietly. That's the only
Cross that
point of
bridge
it.
when we get there.
Well,
Mr. Chairman, let me ask this, Mr. Thacker, what were your substantive issues? You had mentioned in your comments earlier that you had some non-funding issues on your mind.
Okay, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to follow up real quick on what Jay was saying about we're gonna cut their revenue. If we've got a house that wants to blow the whole thing up, I think maybe time to not release much about that. Anyway,
Well-
mine were charter schools. I don't want to fight charter schools. We're very charter school friendly, but it doesn't make sense to me that charter schools can build wherever they want. When when public schools have very stringent standards about capacity and capacity needs, and to me it seems a bad use of taxpayer money to go out and spend $75 million on a high school when tomorrow somebody can build a charter school right next door to it and just totally throw your capacity and everything off. All I'm asking is, let's have the same set of rules, let's work through, we grant the charters, let's work with them on locations as well, as opposed to them being able to go to any location they want. I don't necessarily want to be restricted, but I want to be rational about it. That's one. 2 would be trying to eliminate the rollback. That would be a big help to us. I don't think it probably impacts other counties as much as it does us. And the last one, I agree with Dr. Pace on the alternative to the SSA using the SAT and ACT. Those are really the 3 main ones, I guess, on my list. I got fiddly ones, but those are.
So basically, the location of charter schools, that they would work with district staff to plan that.
What would be,
Yes, you know it, Darryl. I don't know if the lobbyists know it. We can grant a charter, they got a year or 2 years to go build a Smith school. They can go wherever they want. They can build one right next door to a school that's currently existing. And when we've got such stringent requirements on where we go, it seems backwards to let somebody that really go wherever they want. You know, one group's got requirements on capacity needs, the other one has none. And I get private versus the other, but they're all public schools, and it's a hell of a lot of public money to build public schools.
so my question is, per the current statute, all the board has the authority to do is to say whether or not you're allowed in Osceola County. It's like a pass, but you can't say, yes, you're allowed in Osceola County, but you have to we get to approve your site.
You just authorize the
That is correct. And Ricky, you might as well go ahead and play your 2 cents in on that. I agree with you too, by the way.
But the second piece of that as well is that they only have to tell us that they're not opening like 30 days before the beginning of the school year. We ought to at least have to know 6 months ahead of time, yes, they're on schedule, no, they're not on schedule, those types of
What the
things.
projected enrollment is based on kids who've actually enrolled.
Clarence,
Ricky wants to say
sorry,
No,
Rick.
I was just going to say, the approval process maybe is because we set in on the approval process breakout session. That's part of it. But yeah, these charter schools, they need to be working with the districts. But if you look at Osceola County, we're utilizing charter schools as capacity needs. Whereas in a lot of districts, say Palm Beach County or these coastal districts that are flush with cash, these charter schools are running right up next to a school that maybe they hear is parents are mad about, and they're chunking a school right next to it, and they're fighting each other. We don't want to, and I would agree with Mr. Thacker, I don't want to fight with charter schools. I want to work with them. But we want to make sure that those regulations and rules are in place to say, hey, we're going to work with you, and we're going to be able to approve you or not approve you. That's getting into a lot deeper thing there.
Mr. Weishauer, before that, I just wanted to say one thing. My study of the charter school law and how it came about was, the intent was that it functions the way that you mentioned in the Palm Beach. They were not intended to be used to meet capacity needs of public schools. That's what I read.
Is it choice or capacity? They're not. It's choice.
Competition.
It was
Choice and competition. Osceola County doesn't work that way.
No,
It's
no.
about capacity.
Yes, and your observation is absolutely correct, Mr. Weishauer.
Thank you. When it comes to, everyone knows that I think charters are a good thing, and not just because they're charters, but because they provide choice. And I think that's an important distinction to make, because if I don't make it, people can get lost in the idea that I'm advocating for charters and not that I'm advocating for choice with the reality of what I'm speaking to. And I've always said, to me, it doesn't matter whether it's traditional school, charter school, private school, homeschool, virtual school. I don't really care, as long as it's high-quality education and the parents are choosing what they think is best for their students. So that's the background of my comment. The challenge that I see with the approach, and it all goes back to understanding the landscape, and that's why I appreciate Mr. Horner's initial approach to this today, is he laid out, guys, here's what you need to know we're dealing with. When we go up to Tallahassee and we start advocating for any one of these many things, you need to understand who it is that you're speaking with, what their priorities are, what their background is, and whether or not you're going to be able to get anywhere or gain any traction with them in the first place. I don't think that, it's not even a thing, I'm confident that we're not going to make traction when you start talking about placing regulations on charter school locations. I don't disagree with some of the comments that you had brought up at the Florida School Boards Association, Mr. Booth, regarding authorizers and do we really have teeth. We say we're the authorizers, but then we say no. Hypothetically, they just go to the appeals commission, they get it overturned. I think there's there's validity in how that process is set up, but I think there's also the importance of making sure that local control is really supported to a greater extent. And I think that's probably really what your point is, which I agree with.
Yes, sure.
My challenge with this, and Mr. Thacker, this addressed to you, is my opinion is that we've had this conversation in a different context before. There are Osceola-specific things, and then there are global things. If we want to sit here and talk about what's going to happen or what should happen for Osceola County, that's one piece. Then we have Central Florida Coalition, then we have Florida School Boards Association, and part of the priority of making sure that Mr. Thacker was on the legislative committee, I was on the board, and all those type of things for the Florida School Board Association is so that as we get into more of these global policy initiatives, we use our influence in those organizations to try to help shape policy there, which we think is going to help create a better landscape for education throughout the state of Florida. All that to say, my concern would be the same concern that we've discussed in the past. If we go up and we say we want to try to address inequities within the FEFP, and then the next sentence out of our mouth is, and by the way, we want to do this, this, and this to charters, whether we think it's two charters or not, the receivers are going to think it's two charters, then my concern is that our initial argument gets pushed to the side because the focus is, you guys aren't coming in, you're not talking our language, we're not going to work with you, we're going to protect what we think is best. So I just want to be very careful about what approaches we take. And that's not to say, Mr. Thacker, that I disagree with you bringing it up. That's what this time is for us to talk these things out, to consider them, weigh them, and them. But I would have serious concern with adding to our legislative priority list that we're going to try to create these opportunities or these limitations on charters from the Osceola School Board, as opposed to joining in with the Central Florida Coalition and just saying we're one name on a list, or the Florida School Boards Association.
No, I agree with you too. I don't really disagree with what you're saying at all either, but that may be a better way to approach it. Those are just kind of my
I think it's okay
issues.
to have the
And
conversation.
what the lobbyists need to tell us. I certainly don't want to go in with the first comment that shuts them down, and it doesn't matter,
Yeah.
if we just ask for, we need water fountains for our kids. So, yeah, if that's what we need, input from the lobbyists too. If that's-
Can I ask a question
Maybe
about,
you address something else, I find that too. And maybe as a board, we send it that way.
Clarence, let me ask you a question.
And I'll say this, I agree, Clarence, with the idea of we've got to figure out, if we're talking about public education, and charter schools, traditional schools are both public education, when we look at that from a state perspective and from a local governing perspective, I do agree with the fact that we have to do a better job of how do we really align all these things, because your point at the beginning of your comment is 100% correct, that ultimately these are all taxpayer dollars that are paying for these facilities to provide essentially what we know is turning out to be the same type of product or service, right? The education is not necessarily always innovative and different and unique and all of that. And so I do agree with you in spirit that we need to figure out how do we work within this current landscape of public education, both charter and traditional, to make sure that we're not spending $70 million on a campus and then having a $20 million campus pop up right next door. We agree in spirit on that. I just want to make sure that we don't get lost in how we go about that. So,
Can I ask a question? Because first of all, Kelvin's going to yell at me because I keep disagreeing with him, and I keep agreeing with him. I think
you're smart, and I get it.
No.
Actually, you are smart.
No,
I also get it.
No, I know. I'm just
No
teasing.
inflection and emphasis added. Okay.
Yeah, I'm teasing. So, but you're right. On this rollback rate issue, and that's anything that smacks of a tax increase is very hard to do.
Absolutely.
I'm willing to maybe go have a conversation about it. If you were to do it all, it might be something where it requires either a supermajority or a unanimous vote. Is that considered a win? Because you're not, to do just a majority vote and then you can, they're gonna want a high bar. And I don't even know if you put a real high bar if you're gonna get it, but now I'm gonna put you guys on the hot seat. Is it worth going forward to ask for, if it turns into we need a supermajority, or they say, well, if it's really that big of a deal, and if it's unanimous, then you can, you don't have to go.
You probably would have to fight for that then, because.
Right, so then it's not worth, unless you can get just to that supermajority, don't try and pursue it? Is that what I'm reading?
I'm not sure it's still on the books.
I got a question on that. I hear what you're saying about the formula. Don't touch the formula because it's a zero-sum game. You get $10 more, somebody got $10 less. If you look at the rollback rate, or the rollback, that's not a zero-sum game.
Right.
Because what happens in Osceola is irrelevant to what happens in a merger in Duval County.
Yes.
And so somewhere we got to be able to. And I'm not sure where. I'm hearing what you're saying. I don't disagree with you at all.
But
Where does that leave us?
right, so I'm going to address both your comments. One, on the FEFP, I think we ought to engage. I think there's an opportunity, and I don't know that it would be so much, I'm taking Sarah's numbers, I don't know that it's so much about us climbing up the rungs, but it would only be a big win if you squished, if you condensed the FEFP, and so maybe we're 66th, but instead of it being 4%, it was 2.5%. But that would be $8 million to Osceola County.
Okay.
So there's lots of ways to skin the cat. So Clarence, my thing is when I'm making notes of what I'm taking away that you guys will put on your list, and I'm putting operational dollars on the list. That I think it's worth engaging. On the rollback rate, what I'm saying is the legislature is rabidly anti-tax. I cannot overstate the House's feelings towards tax increases, and the governor's. If you were to put in a package an element that said, you know what, a school board doesn't have to implement rollback if they have by supermajority vote, they can do it. That might, if you're trying to put that in a package, I'm envisioning the conversation with the Senate bill sponsor, and they go, if I put that on there, it's dead. The governor's going to veto my bill, or I can't get it heard in the House with that. It's tough. So I'm not saying, and then my second question, which is maybe more importantly, is the one I already asked, which is, if it had a supermajority or needed unanimous, you probably can't pass it in Osceola. So is it worth even trying? We go through a bunch of effort to do something really hard, which I'm not sure you can do. And so I come back and tell you, congratulations, board, I did what you said. You can not implement rollback by unanimous vote. And then you say, well, Mike, we can't do it.
Stop ICMR and not have any more economic development? Because it doesn't seem to help.
Well, if you ask the state house right now, they're not going to fund a single economic development project. So,
Right.
so anyway, in terms
All
of
we're asking for is the tax rates that are there.
I get it. No, I get it, but I don't know that you can.
That's fine.
Mike,
That's fine.
let's get Jay in. He had something that he'd been waiting patiently.
Yes.
After Jay.
After Jay, make
I want to
it
go back to
I will. I'll make it really
something,
quick.
chance we can have a victory. And you, I didn't realize there may be an appetite at this point within Tallahassee to possibly scrap FSA. I don't know that
That's a
that's
strong word. Alternatives too.
to scrap or modify it.
an option.
I mean, let me finish, okay?
Leave it for alone.
Now, if there is an appetite to replace it with something more effective, for less money, if the state's interested in saving money and getting the same or better result, there are very viable options without going, and Florida-centric options to consider that if there's some traction, and I'll be specific. I mean, you want to, well, what is it? And it's real easy, because, and I know it exists. The State Department of Education, relative to K-12, has never engaged our state university system. Our state university colleges of education, and I've talked with the deans of the colleges of education ad nauseum, there is an appetite, for instance, and I'm going to use these as hypotheticals. You give all the K-12 math curriculum and testing to, say, USF. You give all the science curriculum and testing to UF. You give all the English and reading testing to FSU. You give all the teacher evaluation metrics to UCF. And number one, the argument is, well, they're not geared up for it. Well, they could be if they got the money the state was already paying private vendors, and they could do it for less, and their motives would be entirely different. Their motives are not, we've got, because what's happening right now, since 2008, the vendors, whoever they are, have accurately predicted the percentage of students by grade level, by subject area, that would do poorly because they are the vendor of choice to sell remediation back to those districts. So it's turned into a cyclical business model. It's been very successful, and FSA is no different. Now they're not for profit, so to speak, okay? Meanwhile, it's still very suspect. The test is suspect, the grading is suspect. If you take something that's got credibility, our city system, colleges of education, engage them in it, the motivation, the credibility all becomes different, the funding for it becomes different, so the state can get a better result with greater credibility and spend less money, and there's an appetite. The problem with the universities is because they recognize they operate in a political environment, they have not come forward, and they've never been asked. When I was chairman of the Central Florida School Board Coalition in 2013, I floated this, I got invited to the deans of all the colleges of education, meet quarterly. I got invited to present. They were all over it like white on rice, except for one university, which I later found out was funneling their graduates to Pearson, who was doing the FCAT, and they were very anti that because they were tied into Pearson. I don't know that the state legislature is aware that this could be even a possibility.
But Jay, not to speak for, I can't help you with that,
No.
dude.
Jay,
You're talking the wrong sort
But
of.
the point is, if you hear,
Jake.
if you let me know if there's if you find there's an appetite, let me know
Okay.
where it's coming from. I'll carry
Want me to go
the
now?
ball.
You
I
know,
will tell you, among the FADS organization, there was no appetite for a complete overhaul of.
that was a good dissertation, Jay. I don't think, it was, I don't know about brief, but it was, but it was.
That's a relative term.
In case you don't know, Kelvin, it was brief.
Wow, okay, I'll be on the lookout.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Mr. Weisser, I actually agree with a lot of what he says, but when I say, and I think, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Thacker, but he can clear this up. When I say, hey, I'd like to look at these charter school things, that doesn't, I trust these guys, Mr. Bruce, Mr. Horner, to know the makeup, and we know the makeup, I know the makeup, I know some of the people that are serving. So you guys do what's right, but I think it's okay, I still believe it's okay to throw this out sometimes, and I think these two gentlemen know how to do that. Hey, you know, in Osceola County, we might want to make schools, you know, these charter schools, they love charter schools in Osceola County. But, you know, hey, they need to kind of maybe have a say about where they go. Yeah, what do you think about, I mean, I understand that they know how they're going to get that done.
Ricky, let me throw.
I just wanted to say that.
Let me throw a target of opportunity with that, and why it's good to have this conversation with us. So let's say there's a major overhaul, and they've got this big charter school package they're doing.
Sure.
Maybe there's a sweetener, and I'm not saying you can do this, but, and I'm not saying it should be on your priority, which I don't think it should be on your priority list.
yeah.
But let's say there's opportunity, and you could throw in some language, say, if you're a county that over 10% of your students are in charter schools, then the school board gets to have a say-so
There you go.
in the location, because there's so many charter schools, we need to help provide, we're gonna help them, we wanna help charter schools by making sure they're not growing on top of each other. Now, that's, well, if I'm a legislator, I'm Mike Baleka, and I'm going, I love me some charter schools, but listen, there's only 3 counties in the state, sorry, I keep looking to Sarah to nod if I'm right or wrong, but how many counties in the state are over 10%?
Yeah.
You know, if they go, well, yeah, I'm not worried about those guys. Let them have a say. Then they go, I don't want the camel's nose in the tent. If I give it to them, I get it. But I'm just saying, that's where it's good for us to know, because if there's an opportunity to do something for where we're unique, we're aware.
Yeah, and it's not about being
An
anti one or the
example
other.
of where that's happened, Avant-Garde on Pleasant Hill,
Yeah.
was a claim, we had to close it. May have to close Avant-Garde, you've got Matter right beside it that's highly successful, coming
Yeah.
out of Miami, I mean, and they're just taking the kids.
And just one,
Well, in reality,
enrollment
there's 3
continues to
schools
decline.
within a stone's
Yeah.
throw there.
Yeah.
just one
Lago, Avant, and Matter.
One quick observation, and only because I am actually, my daytime job is a lawyer. And here's what it is that, you know, there's Florida Constitution, I know a lot of people love Constitution here, federal, Second Amendment, but there's also this thing called the state constitution.
Us?
And
The 10th is my favorite. But we don't use that one anymore.
The third. But here's what I want to say is that, you know, Florida law does not allow for a competing public school system. And what's going on, for example, when you look at charter school and they're no longer a choice, which is what we all agree, we're 100% in that we want the choice. Here in Osceola County, it hasn't been a choice, it's been capacity. And what's going on is that, and that's where the revenue is an issue, because we should have the adequate amount of revenue to offer a public education for everyone. And if every student wanted one, we couldn't fit them. That's the problem. Now, here's the other thing. When you're talking about advancing a policy that says, oh, we're going to go ahead and have a say, well, that goes into, you know, a competing public school system, which is not allowed under the Florida state constitution, in my opinion. And there was a lawsuit. The reason I know a little bit about this is because that was an issue that was brought up in a lawsuit that didn't go through. Anyways.
So, Mr. Chairman,
It says equity in there as well.
Right, it says uniform. Yeah, uniform.
Yeah,
So,
so
Mr. Chairman, let me throw this out to the board, and you tell me if I have misread the room. So, I've got 4 priorities.
Second
on the list.
Amendment.
Guns in schools, teacher, open carry, go into.
They keep reminding me that I could authorize board members to.
I got the R reminding you.
do you want an armed J on the day? No.
No, I'll just bring my pit bull.
So here's what I'm taking away. Obviously, the two, capital dollars and operational dollars. So, under capital dollars, and since Mark is here, under capital dollars, the things that we need help from you is we need to have a document, spreadsheets,
Got it.
graphs
Got
that
it.
show there's still a need, and that show that we're building our schools at a low cost, and that we can, that's something that's not the lies, damn lies, and statistics, but that's really clear, because that's a big deal to these House members. So we need to really be able to show Osceola County is way below the state average and the required and all that. That's going to be crucial to making that case. Operational dollars,
Devin is over.
the operational dollars, here's the three things we need. We're going to need an analysis showing why Osceola County is funded so low. We're going to need something that shows why we spend significantly less than the state average on admin dollars. And then here's the hard one, those are easy. So, Dr. Pace, I would love a menu of little fixes, things like that ELL calc. There's probably half a dozen others. If you could arm us with those little things that, particularly Osceola is in such a unique position for high growth, that if they would just do it differently, that'd be helpful. And frankly, that's a pun I just made by saying frankly, your new general counsel, frankly, there's an opportunity there, because he's so tied in with the state that he'll be a good ally to help us on those little, but if you can give us those three things on operations, those things we need from you on operations. So those would be two, and then the other two would be more substantive issues, which would be alternative to FSA and paper testing, putting that on a, so those would be the four I've got, and then those would be the four that you'd put on all your documents, John, and all that good stuff. Then the two we'll kind of keep in our hip pocket that we're keeping a lookout for would be maybe the charter school, improvements to the charter school approval process, and rollback relief. So we got those kind of looking for targets of opportunity if they present themselves, but I wouldn't put those in your packet that you take the delegation, and as far as OLA goes, I wouldn't put any of those on OLA. I'd just put the paper testing, alternative FSA on the secondary OLA list, and the capital and operation dollars on the main OLA list. So that's what I'm taking away to get us out of this meeting. That's what we need to do.
We have about 25 minutes.
So tell me where I'm wrong on what I just put out.
Everything you said is wrong.
There you go. We
You forgot to say
disagree.
you forgot to say Jay Wheeler was great to start out with.
And the role of Jay's
What
discussion-
OLA priorities are going to be, or am I the only one who's interested?
In what? Second?
What the other OLA priorities have been
Haven't
identified?
seen this. I know
as?
the censor thing is,
Censor's gonna be-
that's the only thing I know for sure at this point. Can I
And,
make a couple comments?
and Deborah, I think there's a decent chance that St. Cloud and Kissimmee may come back in this year, and so that
That'd
will
be outstanding.
change the priority list
Yeah, that's
as
what
well.
John indicated.
Both of them are very pro-censor and pro-Osceola getting more money for schools, so anyway, so sorry, Doug.
I just had a couple of thoughts, comments, and recollections. On the rollback, I think when they adopted that, they put a provision in there that a district could reenact or roll it back to, or get it back to what it was with an extraordinary vote of the board and a referendum. So it's a pretty high bar, but I think the mechanism is there. I've had conversation about notification on charter school location, and I think there's some understanding of the logic of that. You're responsible to the state to provide numbers that you need to count on for money, and then somebody takes that away. I think that's just an inherent fairness issue.
Right.
I've been asked for a remedy. Clarence and I have talked about it, so we need to think about what we might suggest. And on the DCD, there was a bill last year introduced by Representative Metz from up in Lake County to repeal it. It was sponsored in the
Didn't get a hearing.
Senate by Huckel, did not get a hearing. Co-sponsored by a good number of members from Central Florida, including Mike LaRosa. And I talked with him yesterday. Yeah, we had coffee yesterday to talk about it. And he said, well, he said, I didn't really understand it. He said, Representative Metz gave me a spreadsheet to show that we got less money, so of course I signed the bill. And so we talked about the DCD and the way it works a little bit, my meager understanding of it. And he said, well, it's stupid to measure cost of living by district. He said it should be regional. So maybe we can take a look, do some runs somehow. And I said, well, do you have a logical way of grouping the regions and metropolitan, what you call census districts or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, if we can kind of do a little homework and see if the state changed to a regional adjustment rather than a county by county, and do some runs and see what happens, because there's some logic in that. You're going to get back to who gets and who gains,
Oh, yeah.
but we may be able to gain some allies in that way. So it's just a thought.
Absolutely.
So a couple quick things. Mr. Booth, I agree with your comment earlier about there's nothing wrong with, having those side conversations and bringing those things up. I want you to know that I do agree with you on that, and I think the approach that you laid out with those not being priorities, but they are just, back-end pieces that we're aware of, because it is something we need to make sure we figure out how to manage that, particularly in a district like ours, who has been very open to choice and does have so many students in our charter school. So I do agree with you on that. I'm good with everything that you laid out as far as operational and capital. Again, my key piece is that we have to build a strong case based on merit, particularly with what we know is going on in the House and how your work is going to be impacted this year with the Speaker and what they're working to do in the House, and the new approach to how lobbying is going to work in Tallahassee. And I know that doesn't hamstring you guys, but it certainly provides some additional limitations for you guys to work through. And I think it's important to the extent that's needed that you guys explain, and you don't have to do it now, but explain to the board where you see those impacts directly impacting where you see those changes directly impacting your ability to perform for the school board in the way that you've been able to in the past and the way that we expect you to in the future. So just so you know, it's not something we can just breeze by and not ever talk about, and then post-session you go, oh, well, you got to remember Corcoran said blah, 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 we couldn't do it. Maybe everybody here already knows and understands it, maybe not, but I think it's incumbent upon you guys at some point to describe to the board, whether it's individually or collectively, those limitations. My question that I had yielded on earlier, the FSA piece, I have no problem with that at all, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in it. I completely understand where Mr. Wheeler's coming from with the financial implication that comes into play with what approaches we do or don't take at what point with the FSA. My memory, and I could be wrong on this though, isn't there already conversation taking place about shifts or changes with the FSA, and it's utilization across the state, whether or not it will or won't have staying power? Is that just water cooler talk? Am I wrong? Is there anything substantive happening there? No?
It's more water cooler talk because of, I think, the relationship between the governor and the commissioner and the fact that they've built so much around this piece. I do believe the governor, from what I understand, is amenable to this idea of using like ACT, SAT as a piece. The board is not, but that doesn't mean that it won't, that it won't gain some traction, because there are enough districts advocating for that, and it makes sense to legislative folks who say, oh yeah, the SAT, ACT, everybody takes that for college, so why couldn't we use that? It has to be a good test. So I think there's a little bit of interest in that piece. But in terms of the FSA really going away, I don't think you'll see that.
But to your point, Dr. Pace, not only is the ACT and SAT recognized, the governor's decided to pay bonuses to teachers who can give their SAT scores.
Governor didn't decide that.
That's Speaker of the House.
Oh, that was the Speaker. Is he still Speaker of the House?
He's now the
He
Speaker
is
of the
now.
House.
Okay,
He was
then,
Speaker and Appropriations Chairman before.
then it becomes an even stronger argument, because we've got a Speaker of the House that's bonusing teachers who took the SAT 30 years ago, based on their scores, so it makes perfect sense to slide right into it. But as absurd as that argument is, it is a legitimate argument.
I got a quick question.
I guess my point would have been, Dr. Pace, is that the conversation that I recall hearing was a flavor towards allowing national norm testing to take the place in some capacity, and maybe it's what you're describing here. And I think we're going to continue to see that conversation advance itself, and not just in our area or even our state. So I just wanted, because you have your ear to the ground more so on that than I would have. I just want to clarify, FEFP and operational capital dollars, those are our two key priorities. The FSA shift to using national norm testing for 9th and 10th grade, in particular with what you laid out, and then the ability to use paper testing as opposed to online testing. That's what we're kind of laying
That's
out
the
right
four
now.
I've got.
And my comment, Chairman, was that we've discussed kind of a lot of numbers here today, the administrative cost, the building cost, and then we have our priorities. I'd love to see both those, and I know this probably goes without saying, I'd love to see both those white sheeted. Basically, I know we'll have some more in-depth stuff. There they
It
are.
says fact sheet to
Yeah.
provide to the board,
There you
the
go.
state delegation, and our lobbyists.
Yep. And I know there'll be some more in-depth spreadsheets and all that other stuff, but I'd love to see that boom, one sheet. So I know, because going back to Darren, and by the way, I just want to say, I'm glad Darren's in the Congress. Darren got all the ag money, by the way, Kelvin. The agriculture community supported Darren because Darren was very supportive of the agriculture community. But I can remember Darren always telling me when we would go to Tallahassee and talk about stuff, where's that white sheet? Where's that white sheet? Give me that white sheet. And so if we could have that, that'd be great.
Yes, sir.
Can I check with Clarence? Okay, all right, then I'm gonna check with, Clarence, you still there?
Kumbaya,
All right, okay.
See, we're chorus practice while you're in Las Vegas, okay.
All right, let me get, okay, Tim.
Yeah, my one last comment was, I think it's important that we as a board and we as a district and as a team know that, yes, when it comes to funding components and all those things, we're at a disadvantage. But let's not operate from a victim mentality. It's a very dangerous place for us to operate in society, and we see it perpetuated all throughout the United States right now. Everybody thinks they're a victim of something. Let's remember that in the size and the scale of things, we're the 14th largest district in the state of Florida. We're in the top 20% of districts. When you look across the United States, one of the largest school districts in the United States.
Number 40, I think.
So we have to understand that we can't operate from this poor us mentality. And if we have a mindset shift about how we go about things and how we see ourselves, it will also shift how people begin to see us as well. And I think that's going to be very, very important. Osceola County is not a 22,000 student school district any longer. That was 10 years ago. We're past all that now. It's 15 years ago.
It was
We're
20
past all
years
that.
ago, but
Whatever. We're past that now. So I think it's important for us to begin to understand that although we have challenges from a delegation standpoint, and we know that 100%, that when you're talking about 67 school districts, we're the 14th largest in the state, and we need to make sure that we act in that accord as well, and that we carry ourselves in that accord as
and
well.
we make a white sheet that shows how much of a victim we are.
Hold on. We know, and then you can.
Okay, the only thing I want to say, I think, Tim, you make a great point. We shouldn't operate as a victim. And to flip that even further towards that argument, I think one of the things that we need to do, that I know that I've done in the past, but we haven't been great, and Dr. Pace and I have been sharing some comments about it, is I think we need to make a real effort, hopefully sooner rather than later, to get each one of us, we'll figure it out, maybe we talk about it at the board meeting on the 13th, that we take a legislator into our schools. I've had Neil in celebration schools a few times this year already. But I think it's important to not just have a conversation that we're the school district. Get them in school seeing kids. I mean, that's what we do. And once, it's easy to have conversations about a huge school district with 7,000 employees, 63,000 kids. But walk into a classroom with kids sitting at desks and teachers teaching, all of a sudden the dots connect a whole lot better. And you don't have to do anything, so keep your mouth shut and let them look at those great kids.
I take Mike every day because his kids go to school in a public school. And
Okay, and I've had Neil at the celebration in the last month, and now it's on you.
I got mine covered.
So John Cortez is
Look, because we have about 12 minutes left, board, is there anything else that you want to discuss on legislative or for the white sheet or for anything else?
Exceed my expectations.
Okay, that's Jay. Clarence?
I'm good.
All right, Mr. Sire.
Good. Just thank you, gentlemen.
Mr. Booth?
I want to say something, but I'm
Say it.
no. Let
Say it.
Clarence, he
Oh,
chimed
Clarence,
in.
Clarence came back, all right.
Clarence, really quickly, Mixon and Associates are also here. We'll take a break between. Do you want to call back in, or would you, they have brought some prepared documents that I can also just make sure that you get?
How long before they go?
10 minutes?
10 minutes?
Probably 10 minutes
Yeah.
or so.
Call back.
Just go ahead and gather it all, I think. If you don't mind.
And Clarence, they also brought food. Do you want us to put it through the phone line or just leave it here for you?
That's why I was responding when I was starting.
Superintendent, is there final words?
Just one other question that I have for the board and perhaps for our lobbyists. In my previous life, we typically had a lunch with the legislative delegation in which you had an opportunity just to really kind of break bread together and talk. Typically, we ended up having one of our culinary programs, cook the meal, serve the meal, just to kind of showcase some of the good things that we're doing in our schools. We could potentially talk about the new high school and give you an opportunity just to talk with them, particularly when you look at the fact that, Senator Cortez is going to be new, those types of things. Is there interest in that? It's always difficult to try to schedule for you and for them, but I don't know if you think it's viable or possible.
Absolutely.
I think it's a good
As long as
idea.
I get to pick the menu, we're in.
All right.
Make sure there's a lot of ketchup on everything.
Make sure you-
But I also
It's
believe it's
Mr.
valid.
Sire for the menu.
So maybe after the first of the year, we'd try to look for it.
Yeah, I do this every year for the ag community. I
Uh-huh.
schedule this meeting, and Mike and I got together this year. We already have the ag coalition kind of legislative luncheon, we call it, is scheduled, I think, for January 19th or something like that.
Uh-huh.
So after that week, they're in session. So
Right.
you have to have it done this year by the third week
Can we
of.
do it that afternoon, Ricky?
I was going to say.
You might could go ahead and, they're gonna already have a big steak lunch that we feed them, but it might be good to go ahead and grab them for that. I don't know, ask
Maybe we
a former
provide them
legislator.
breakfast.
We could do breakfast or do appetizers at the end of the day or something.
That deal starts at 10.
So if you want, here would be a suggestion.
Yes.
That perhaps doing it for the full delegation, that might be a next year thing. Here's what I would do. Torres, go take him to lunch and do a lunch with Torres.
When he reaches out to you.
They were supposed to be here.
John lives in Osceola County. Mike knows Osceola County. Cumbie is fine. I think the new person you need to introduce her to is our one and only senator who lives in Orange County, and go spend quality time with him. So I think if the school board takes Victor Torres to lunch,
There you go.
that's at a school, at a culinary. I'm just saying,
Okay.
and here's the other thing. LaRosa and coming, maybe some of these other bigger personalities will also take all the spotlight. Go spend time with Victor. He's the guy we need to educate. LaRosa's already on the team. We don't need to educate him anymore. So, Mr. Chairman, you're wrapping up. I am
wrapping it up.
If I can say this,
Get my comments?
Before you make the,
Good.
after you're done, I have one last thing.
Not the 19th.
All right?
No, I want, Jay used the word expectation, Tim, but I want to be clear so everybody's walking out of here with reasonable expectations. I thought I set a fairly bleak table to begin. The table's still bleak. If we're pushing for operational dollars, I don't want you to think I'm going to come in here, and Doug's going to come in here, and 6 months from now tell you, hey, here's all the operational. We're going to walk a road of 1,000 miles, but we're going to start taking our first steps. If we can get lucky, great, but we've got a long way to go.
You get lucky.
So, when it comes to exceeding expectations, calibrate your expectations appropriately in that not just our delegation. I mean, yeah, our delegation, we could have, it could be stronger, but the overall environment in Tallahassee, it is tough for what we're trying to do. So these are not easy feats. You asked the word
If it was
expectation.
easy, we wouldn't need you, Mike.
Right. Letting you know, as you move forward, this is easy, and as we work forward, and we're going to work hard on these substantive things, and Clarence made this point earlier, and having done this for a long time with OLA. We'll bring home a win on a substantive issue. So we'll come in and SRAF, you you desperately wanted flexibility. We brought it. Okay, great, thanks, move along. Nobody really cared 2 months later. And what happens with these hot topic substantive things would happen all the time in OA. We'd put them on the list, Doug and the crew would work really hard, and we'd get it, and they'd say, great, but the next year, what about the money? And you were only measured on the dollars you brought home. You said, well, what about all these other things you wanted me to do? Yeah, but we pay you this, and the ROI is driven strictly on the money. So I'm just asking you to put that in the back of your mind. We're going to work on things when we achieve them, and also with these substantive issues, they're all team effort deals. They're not. It's not going to be Horner and Bruce that did these. It's going to be 50 different people playing a role. I'm putting that in because I'm going to say it to you next year, and I'm just asking you to remember that as well. So those are my only 2 cautionary notes.
Don't underestimate yourself. That's number 1. And number 2, I believe in your greatness, and I know what you're capable of doing. So, I know you can make it happen. I've got all the faith in the world in you. All the time you need, just come back and tell us how you got millions.
Thanks, Coach.
All right, so
Can I ask one quick question, Mike and Doug, and it's a yes or no answer?
go.
I know with the new rules that the speaker has put in, there's a lot of different changes procedurally made. One of them is my understanding is that the bills need to be filed at the start. You're not going to bring one up on the last day. We're all prepared and know what those are and well versed in them.
Yes, and what we're talking about doing, we wouldn't be using that process anyway, unless there's an opportunity. I don't, Doug, unless you're wrong, I don't see us filing for a special project and putting in a special project quote bill. You're going to need to do it for sensor clearance, but for the 4 things on our list, none of them would merit that action.
Yeah, they're not appropriations asked.
Okay. Because I just wanted to make sure there was nothing following people. I know y'all got that. I just want to make sure.
So no.
I'm glad you set the
Yes and
expectations
no.
low, because I know you're a high achiever.
All right.
The rest of us
Anyways.
understand.
All right, well, board, listen, we had a very good discussion. I think that we all realize that we live in a world where just talking about things is a struggle. We're just recognizing things that are evident and obvious and physically there becomes taboo. The fact that we could go ahead and talk about things, whether we know that they're a realistic proposition in terms of what we discussed here in school funding and equitable treatment, and all these topics. I think it's more important that we could talk about them and have these ideals at this point until the climate changes, that they can become a reality rather than just ignoring that they exist. All right, so thank you everyone for participating. Thank you, Mr. Horner, Mr. Bruce,
This is Jay Wheeler.
Bruce, and until next time, see you soon.
Thank you, Clarence. Have a good day.
Oh, Max,
All right, so
I'm sorry.
thank you.
You're welcome. I'm sorry.
I got it. All right, so we're gonna begin now. And I'll let you go ahead and just get started with our opening.
Okay, all right, we have a couple documents in there for you guys. They're really just overviews, and I'll let Jim hit the high points on the financial stuff, which is what most of those documents are. But I heard the latter part of your conversation, so I know you've talked a bit about legislation and what's going to be happening in the climate up there, so we won't go over that too much. Just to talk about a couple things that have been filed that were issues last year that you've probably heard of. Recess is back again. The recess bill, it has some strong bill sponsors, so that is more than likely, I think, going to be heard, and we'll see what happens with that, but that's back. We did see a member that filed that reading instruction bill last year. If you're familiar, what came out of the House, a House member has filed basically the exact same bill again, so we'll see if that has any traction, but we're starting to see some of those things.
Is that 7021?
Yes, that was what it was last year, and I'll give you the new bill number. We are watching closely the changes to local referendum requirements. We know the new speaker is interested in that. There was a bill in the House last year. that would have required that they not take place on primary elections, and I think it was, you had to get at least 60% of the vote in order to pass a referendum, so basically make it harder to be able to pass any local referendum. We've heard that that's something that the speaker's interested in doing. Last year, the Senate didn't have as much of an appetite for it, but we're watching that. That's something we anticipate.
So if a
coming
bill
back.
like this passed, then, like, for example, what we did would not have.
It would be, you wouldn't be able to go about it in the same way, exactly. You'd have to do it at a general election
Wouldn't have won
time.
either, would have failed. Yeah, would have failed.
And to be perfectly honest with you, while that seems to be somebody's priority, I'm not sure that's really a priority.
Okay.
Because frankly, the legislature has allowed and encouraged school districts to seek additional funding, both for capital and operations through referenda, rather than committing more state dollars to the K-12 budget. That's just a fact. And that has been a pressure valve that has relieved pressures from key areas, including Orange County, for example, where they have both a half-cent sales tax for capital costs and a full mill for operating costs that were a referendum approved. And they don't have a particularly vested interest in a higher bar like 60%, which, and the voters in some of these very conservative districts are voting for those referendum at higher percentages than that even. So I think the Senate will be not interested in pursuing that, and I think the staff, although leadership has the prerogative to hire them and pay attention to them and fire them, will be whispering in their ears just generally to the membership that, you know, if this is what the local people want, then the local people have the right to be voters and do that. We will certainly support efforts that will provide that continuity of.
Why would you want your local jurisdictions to be in control of anything? That doesn't make sense. That just doesn't make sense.
But yet here we have the president, a great guy, by the way, who's trying to go ahead and remove that local control. It's just one of the ironies of the many that we've had. Right, Mr. Horner?
I think we did get our committee chairs in the Senate, and we know our substantive committee chair in the House. And since Senator Simmons is our appropriations chair in the Senate, rather, I think we can be guaranteed that we're having Lois 300, at least during his tenure. The hopes of that being gone, I think, are long gone, at least while he's around. And
actually, the beneficial side of that, and I've worked with Senator Simmons for many years. He was appropriations chair in the House. He and I have a good rapport and a good, credible relationship established.
Credible relationship?
Credible. He believes in what I say and vice versa.
Okay.
That's a fact. I think that our efforts might be to make sure that if that is going to be an artifact that lives, that it is properly funded as that effort began this year. It was one thing to require that. I don't think that any educator would say it's a bad thing for kids from really deprived environments and who start their careers out several years behind their cohorts shouldn't get more time of instruction. I mean, just simple common sense says that's a pretty good idea. Models like the KIP program over in Jacksonville are built upon that premise, and the Speaker of the House has indicated he thinks that's what's necessary to support and enhance boldly educational improvement for deep poverty kids. But he also said, and this is a recognition that's true, that costs more money than a regular appropriation and a regular program, and therefore it should be funded. And I don't know that this board should tell me if I'm incorrect in this assumption, but you've got some kids that have just enormous challenges in life, period. It's just facts. Yep. And many of them will overcome them and some of them won't, but all of them need additional supports. And if they're going to hold us as school district operated schools to particularly high standards for performance for all students, it is helpful to us, not harmful to us, that we actually get recognition from leadership that some kids have more challenges than others, and those kids might need more fiscal support than others. And if that's the way to which you get money, then you're not trying to fund that extra need from a normative level of funding that would otherwise be used to generally operate the school district.
Jim, I got a question.
Does that make sense? I said a lot of words.
Jim, I got a question for you. In that calculus, is there any discussion of a metric for those students that, let's just call them higher risk students than traditional students, that there are, you've got this universe of those students, and some of them are better for whatever reason, they're gonna perform better and they'll overcome their circumstances, and they are on a path that, let's just say, a college prep path. And then you've got some of those students who really
Very
can
disorganized.
be successful, but they're really not, they really shouldn't be on a college prep path because that's not what motivates them, that's not what they need. So I guess the question, are they seeing it as if you're on a college prep path, you're successful, or if you're on a college prep path, or you're on a career training path, those are both considered successes? And if they are they willing to fund both appropriately but separately because they're two different animals?
The answer to the first part of that question is, do they see them as equivalent or equally valuable and valuable? The answer is yes.
Okay,
And I think that's fairly well entrenched in policy and in the FEFP at this point.
okay.
The question about what things cost is a little more problematic. And I can get into some simplified weeds for you about that in a hurry. The funding mechanism for your career technical, your industry certification programs is a Group 2 fund, a weighted fund, just like ESOL and the 254, 255 ESE kids are very handicapped.
Weighted for FTE per student?
Correct.
Okay.
However, after class size was put in place, superintendents, not your current superintendent, because she wasn't a superintendent, had a propensity to put larger and larger classes into what I'll just call vocational courses. That used to be heavily weighted funded for keeping an auto mechanics class of 15 kids, because putting 15, 25, 18-year-olds in an auto shop is not the safest environment in the world anyway. Those processes were rolled into various fund changes over the years and went away. When class size put a premium on money, because that's really what it's done, is it's gutted your core budget, those classes that could carry more kids were loaded up. The metric to determine how much extra funding you get for those classes is essentially what you as a district report in your program cost report. So, and that is averaged as a rolling 3-year average. So as we put more and more kids in each of those classes statewide, the cost of those classes went down because you had more kids per student and per teacher. So that weighted funding actually got to be below 1. At one point it was like 0.91 weighted FTE for every kid that was in a career program, which is not sustainable fiscally. When Senator Gates was in charge, he put into statute, into the FEFP calculation, that the weighted funding for career programs would be at least the same as the regular funding, the base funding, which is a slightly weighted figure. For high school, 9 through 12, it's like 1.09 something or something like that. So it'll always be the same. Now that's caused us two problems, issues. One is some of those courses cost more than the norm, because they ought to be relatively small and they have expensive equipment, that kind of stuff, and bigger spaces are needed and so forth. Secondly, is that keeping that in Group 2 makes it harder for you to meet your Group 2 cap for things like ESOL that's needed. And when you exceed your cap, you exceed it overall, and you wind up with their funding reduced to 1. And really, that shouldn't even be a Group 2 program anymore, because all it is at best funded the same as the non-group, the Group 1 programs. So we're going to, again, try to work, and with Senator Simmons in the chair, you might have a shot at having that conversation in a meaningful way. When Senator Gates was in the chair, we could have had a meaningful conversation, but he was not very accessible for conversation because he was just busy. I mean, he's just a bright guy and he's really smart and very helpful.
But if you get additional funding for it, where's that money coming from?
Well, that's a different problem, and that is that the overall weight of mass of funding for the FEFP has not ever caught up to what we had pre-recession. And you've got documents that I provided over the course of the last couple of years, but particularly up to date as of the last month or two, and I think we gave them to you in that packet.
Yes.
That you all can study at your leisure, and I'd be happy to talk to you when it's not taking up everybody's time if you're interested, that really show where your money started, which is not where you're measured against. You're measured against the revised third calculation of 2007-8. That's been declared the highest funding ever. That is not true. The highest funding ever was in the first calculation of 2007-8. That bill was passed. It was signed by the governor. You, as a district, built budgets and hired people based on it. There were 2 special sessions.
And they rolled it back.
And they cut back $600 million because the
I
economy
remember.
collapsed.
I know, I remember.
Now, the fact that those other two general appropriations acts were in effect repealed doesn't make them non-existent and doesn't mean that you didn't have to cut $600 million out of your budget. And what I've done is trace for you that pattern, shows you where you were at the bottom of the recession, where you recovered, and I did this in the information you have both statewide and at the district level, and then showed you what you had to spend, what you were mandated to spend out of the new money. So what your real free new money is from the bottom of the recession to now. And you'll see it's a whole lot less than the total new increase, because a lot of that money was pre-spent on FRS rate increases, teacher salary increases, not bad things. We like salaries and benefits for our employees. For the low 100, for the digital classrooms, again, those are not bad things. We're not against that, but that doesn't let you help pay your transportation costs that are still funded at lower than they were 9 years ago. It doesn't help pay your school safety costs that are still funded at less than they were in 2002, by the way. Those are realities of the guts of your operating budget that have not been restored from the recession. And that's a problem that has got to get addressed, and it is not an easy sell, because A, there are other priorities, and B, there are commitments to spending and competing resource needs that are going to drain the general revenue fund in the state. And now we have opened the boogeyman of, when all those places I drove by out there that had like construction cranes on them used to be cow pastures. They were worth what cow pastures are worth. Now there's real people living in them, or real businesses operating in them, and they're a lot more valuable than cow pastures. And this is what Senator Simmons said. He and I were the only two people in the room that ever agreed to it. That was a political issue, not a fiscal one. Those things should count in your tax base. And if we hold your millage rate current, that is not a tax increase on anybody whose house is sitting there, because there's been minimal. I got 3 residential properties, one for Tallahassee, one for my daughter, and one for me. And none of those appraisals have increased significantly in the last 10 years, and none of them, in fact, if anything, are down from where they were 10 years ago. So I haven't experienced a tax increase by holding the millage rates credit constant. The only thing they've done is taxing the new development, which is supposed to pay for itself. It's supposed to yield revenue to pay for services. If they want a workforce in those businesses, they should be expecting to pay for it, and it doesn't have to be at a reduced millage rate. We've got to win that argument. We had kept that genie in the bottle for many years to not be construed to be a tax increase, and we cautioned our clients extensively that, and we had runs that we didn't so much as Mixon, but superintendents in general, complaining that too much of increases in revenue were coming from local monies. And Don Gates used to say, they don't care where the money comes from, just send checks that cash. And I think that's agreeable. And you and I know, you can look outside your own neighborhoods and you know that your neighbors are not being penalized by rapidly increasing homestead prices. That's real growth in your neighborhood, and you ought to accrue the revenue necessary to operate the school district. And we got to try to put that thing back together this session. That's a big deal. We're really, everything I said in those reports about what looks bad for the next 3 years is compounded by an increase of $500 million worth of problems a year for 3 years. So 3 years out will be $1.5 billion less than I'm projecting.
It's interesting. It started by me asking about career training versus regular, and Jim, you turned into Jim.
Well, Mr. Hamilton, that in our previous discussion before you and Jessica arrived, talked about the rollback rate issue, and that's something that, Mr. Thacker, who's not able to be with us today, kind of emphasized. So, let's go.
Sorry, just 2 other things from a policy perspective, and I know the money is what's really important, so I'll let Jim talk. But Jim and I were in a meeting yesterday with Senate staff, the Senate appropriation staff, and also Senate policy staff, and it's basically what we thought. When it comes from a policy perspective, it's going to be higher ed. That's the focus in the Senate, which is good news. They're kind of, I think, they basically said they anticipate a lot coming from the House, and they're going to look at it. So we haven't gotten a lot there. Our chair has not been on an education committee, at least for the last 6-7 years. But she's there with some really important people who are going to be Senate presidents in the future, basically to get what the current Senate president wants done for higher education. I mean, that's basically the message we got. And then from
What do they want? They want medical schools, dental schools, and what do they want?
I think essentially what Senator Negron is saying is that we can't compete with the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, or University of Virginia's premier top-tier Ivy League type schools unless we pay our professors well enough to attract professors of that quality.
it's money.
Which I think we'd love to translate into the same for our place.
That's a right argument.
So if they turn UNF or UF into UVA, and then aren't they going to want the talent pool applying from our high schools to be equivalent
Yes.
to those that
Yes.
apply to UVA?
Yes.
So, okay, but I guess college
Is
professors.
it the cart or is it the
I
horse?
guess college
Yeah, that's
professors
right.
don't have a professors union.
Actually, they do, but they don't hate them as much. Yeah.
Yeah. And the Senate Appropriations staff, I'm sure you guys already discussed what's going on in the House and how there's a different process this year, the way they're handling their appropriations. The
And Mike-
Senate is staying
And Mike
the same.
explained how he's going to be successful.
Nobody's calling anybody evil yet on that side.
That's right. That's right. So I just wanted to mention that. And then also I heard one of your priorities about possibly the use of the SAT, ACT in place, and that's certainly a lot of discussion that we're hearing. As you said, more water cooler, I think, than from a policy standpoint.
Is anybody willing to sponsor a bill?
I think
so.
I think so. Oh, definitely. I think the
don't know that
problem,
for sure, yeah.
and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I've heard is one of the commissioner's issues is that there's case law about you have to have an assessment that aligns with the standards that you
Correct.
teach. Well, our Florida standards don't directly align with the SAT, ACT. Now, you can do a crosswalk or whatever, but case law is what seems to be interfering in her judgment with that ability.
You couldn't adopt it as the end game.
Well, she's got poor judgment.
Wouldn't a more realistic scenario is not substitute in any way with the FSA? And,
Supplement.
yeah, supplement or,
Well, currently there are
or-
processes in place to allow students to take that test, and it's not in lieu of, but
You get the 18.
For a concordant score.
Correct.
That process is basically
Exists.
already in place.
what some folks are saying is it should
Right,
be
but they have to
instead
do
of
both.
taking the FSA.
Right.
Yeah.
And
we could be.
the problem with that is, as the commissioners, and the case law is Florida case laws, Deborah P. versus Turlington from way back when y'all were maybe kindergartners, and I was doing this already.
Kindergarten, not bad.
I probably wasn't born yet.
Quite possibly true. In our very first state assessment issues, and it was proven rather clearly, and it was a big issue among other things, because we are still just desegregating schools, for those of you who think that's always been, this was the mid-'70s, and we still hadn't really desegregated schools in Florida. So there was evidence clearly that students had been not taught that which was tested. And that is, if there's going to be a graduation test requirement, there's got to be proof that that which is tested was taught. While they may allow the ACT as a concordance score, they can do just that crosswalk with standards and say this is the same as that, and let the kid go, because it's not their interest in keeping
But
the
that
kid.
but those tests are not designed to
That's
do
correct.
that at all.
That's right.
That's
They're
absolutely
entrance
correct.
exams. I mean,
That's-
their real purpose is so that the universities can go ahead and
Say no, no, no,
extrapolate
no.
and say, okay,
Yeah.
this is the success rate depending on.
Correct.
That's
For
right.
somebody who scores in the 90%, they don't really do that.
Yes, that's correct.
But our argument is that if the SAT and the ACT are designed to measure college readiness,
Correct.
you're successful for college, and the Florida standards are supposed to prepare kids to be college ready,
Right.
how can you say that there's not alignment? I mean, it may not be line for line, word for word, but if our end goal is college ready, and this nationally normed, valid, and reliable test is measuring, so they say, college readiness,
And there's as Jim said, I mean, there's certainly an appetite for this. I think particularly in the Senate, the House has been more wary, at least in the past. Though we do have all new staff there, and I think that was a real staff-driven thing, to be honest, in the House. So we might have a new attitude, depending on what her views
I'd like
are.
to make a comment on that, just so everybody knows where I stand. You know, all the arguments that are made about the Common Core and the national standards, you know, and I've got my grievances, but having the one good thing about this whole conversation is there is a lot of value in having a nationally normed test so that a state can say, wow, we're not doing good enough. And we should increase it, because I had an argument one day with an anti-Common Core lady, told me, well, that's what China does. Yeah, that doesn't mean it beans to me. I want to know what America can do the best, and I think this is a really, really good way, and I hope that Florida just doesn't go on this train. I think that we can argue about our standards, but we need some sort of nationally normed and nationally recognized measure, so to speak.
When you say train, are you referring to the Trump train?
No.
Okay, just.
No.
Train air conditioning.
The American train, no matter who's the conductor.
Interesting.
But I just wanted to mention that, just so you kind of knew what the argument was on the other side. But I do think there's an appetite for it. For those of you guys that were there for the legislative panel at the FSBA FADS meeting, Simmons spoke a little bit to that, and I think that they're hearing from their constituents, and I think this is something that everyone can kind of understand and get behind. You know, the SAT, ACT's been around for so long, it means something to everyone when they hear it.
And the SAT has modified themselves to change with the times also. They make changes.
And I still don't think it's a perfect system, by the way,
She is
Colin.
just,
And I know
she
it's-
is.
No, I'm in favor of it, I just want to make sure that we can.
She loses control, that's why. The states always wanted control, and if they were good with the control they had, we wouldn't be having these conversations.
That's my position.
So that, just with those 4 points that I heard you guys discussing earlier, I just wanted to mention that.
May I direct your attention to something here?
Sure.
That's why we're
So
here.
it appears that 2016 session, by the numbers, $49,000 allocation for Best and Brightest Teacher Program. There was an initiative previously to, I guess, to put it into the statutes, like,
Make
you
it
know,
permanent.
Make it permanent. Didn't quite get there, but it's still continuing. So is it just a matter of time before this actually just says, and that's the first question, and the follow-up question to that, we should tie it together, is how popular, I mean, how is this being perceived finally?
Well, I think, amongst the education community, there's a lot of I don't know if anger is the right word. People don't like angst about it. But as someone pointed out to me, all the teachers cash their checks.
Exactly.
So that's a difficult thing to argue with, okay? And then this is something that has been, Speaker Corcoran, this was kind of his idea, and now he's Speaker. As you said, there have been efforts for the last couple of years to make it permanent, and that's become a real political thing, because now everyone knows that that's something a Speaker really wants, and so it's been one of those things that's been batted back and forth,
Yeah,
between
but
the House and the Senate.
once people get used to something.
Well, that's true.
And here's why I'm bringing it up. We're talking here about making the SAT and ACT, the test that's gonna. We have teachers, and if this is gonna be the reality of things, then we probably will want to, with policy decisions to make and consider as to what support we want to give teachers to take this test and be able to qualify. If it was gonna go away. See, a couple of years ago when I was thinking about this, I'm like, well, why? This is not going to continue. 2 years lost.
But let me give you another line of thinking about that. First of all, the speaker is committed to things that he's committed to.
I will hope so.
I mean, he is like, his standard is you should be willing to fight till you're dead, which I understand. I feel the same way about things. That's how I live my life, so I don't have a problem with that. He also has a certain measure of consistency about him that is not always evident in some pronouncements that might be important to recognize. So that being said, I think he is committed to the concept that if you're going to get the top 5% of players to come play with you, you got to compensate them in a manner that says in the economic marketplace, in the rewards and punishments of the economy, you're worth something extra. That's how my neighbor who just took a job flying planes for a transport company in Afghanistan gets 3 times more money than the guy that flies the little commuter plane down here from Pensacola, because that's a little different job in Afghanistan, Sure. And they wanted an F-18A Super Hornet pilot with secret clearance, and they paid him 3 times more. So I think it's going to find its way into the long-term law.
Okay, so it does look that way.
But what I think will be different is the mechanism to determine this.
As it is right now, if I understand this correctly, I haven't looked at this for a couple of years, is 2 things. A highly effective rating and an SAT or ACT score that may be ancient.
That's correct.
You know, and so, and that's what's worked so far. That's what's worked so far. And listen, my concern is, what I want to get is, and you giving me that information is that, look, you know what, we should adapt to that this is going to be our reality and see how this could work for us. And what we could do so that our teachers could, imagine what would happen if all of a sudden, all the school districts say, you know what, this is the reality, so we're going to make sure all of our teachers get it. They're going to be getting $10 bonuses.
Right,
Yeah, you're
right,
right.
that's
And
true.
you know what? Fine, but look what we got. We got teachers that went back into some training and standardized testing. I mean, you know, that, and, you know, a bigger buy-in into the concept of using these exams, you know, alongside, you know, the FSA. Be able to also, in their instruction, their curriculum, add, you know, creatively to prepare kids to pass the test. I mean, hey, look, if you can't beat it, join it. So,
I think that the speaker has been told that staff in the department is working on a proposal to supplement replace what he's done, but to retain the concept. And he has not been adverse to that, which is a big deal, because if he was against that, it'd already been.
Dead.
Is there any discussion about the lawsuit against it based on discrimination for age?
No,
Not that I've heard.
no. I think
'Cause
that
I
the
just saw the
speaker has
paperwork again.
spoke about what he thinks about people.
Yeah, I
with
heard
Osceola.
that.
change the language.
loud
and
and clear.
just change the language that they should be, test should have been taken within the last
Because
12 months.
they've sued for
Then nobody
age
gets
and
it
also,
till
I think, minority status.
Yeah.
Because they're saying that
That's
the
what I'm
test is
saying.
culturally
I get you.
biased.
I think that component is going to be, what is used to determine who is the top 20% we're trying to recruit is going to be redefined if this retains. A couple of things that are important about this document, though, and also about the Gardner Scholarships, which is another $80 million bite of the apple, just as you understand how we would represent you. We'll certainly support those two items if you want them supported. But the way the budget's built, this starts with an allocation to the chairs, and there's an education allocation that initially is a pre-K to 20 education allocation. It's one big bucket that the chairs then determine inside the subcommittees initially with the appropriations chair, with the big chair, how much is going to pre-K, how much is going to K-12, FEFB, how much is going to line items like this, what's left in what they call the bill pot, which is...
Jim, are they gonna split that this year since they split Galvano and?
No, they didn't split
and-
the appropriations.
Jim
Yeah,
and Jessica,
one
one
appropriations.
question. What other school districts are you
staff.
guys representing right now?
You have a higher ed chair.
Just-
Yeah,
you've
one
got-
staff.
and
What other school districts are you representing right now?
We work with Escambia, Santa Rosa, Alachua, so I'm going geographically, Marion. That's it.
Okay, so while you're representing all those school districts and Osceola, explain to me, at what point does school district A want something contradictory to what school district B wants? And then how do we know who you're working for?
That's a good question, but let me answer this other thing. There's one policy committee, there's two appropriations
Right.
committees, but I still think they would start with one
You
education.
think they're gonna start with one education allocation in the Senate? They're not gonna give each chairman a separate allocation? That's,
I don't know, we'll see.
that's interesting.
Anyways, if you could answer my question about representation.
First of all, we haven't encountered that to speak of, honestly.
That's good.
Our
mean,
districts
totally.
are not dissimilar. They have the same basic demographics, the same basic
Well,
economics.
Escambia's got oceanfront real estate to be on.
Yeah, but they're not a hell of a lot richer, because what's left is not much. It's all military and slums.
Yeah.
So there's not a vast difference in economics. The policy alignments are pretty similar from one superintendent, one district to another. So it really hasn't been an issue.
Are we the only school district you represent that does not have an elected superintendent?
No.
No. Malcolm, Escambia and Santa Rosa are elected.
Santa Rosa's not elected?
No,
They
they
are
both
elected.
are elected.
Oh, they are elected.
They are
I'm
elected.
sorry, I thought you said,
No,
no.
Marion's elected.
Oh, Alachua was appointed.
And Indian River's appointed.
Does
Oh, and
Alachua
River
have a
Road.
superintendent now?
Not
Not
at the
exactly.
moment. They have in the past, they have an interim right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know, before I leave that,
Oh, sorry.
I don't know how they'll do that. That's a good point. Whether they'll send 2 allocations from the big chair to this.
I can't
subcommittee.
imagine they're not gonna give Galvano his own allocations.
Yeah, you're
The
probably
president
right.
designate is not gonna sit there and say,
Fight with David.
I'm gonna fight with Senator Simmons. Listen, crazy things have happened, but
Yeah, you-
as a past chairman, subcommittee chairman, I would expect my allocation, and I got one time,
These are very sought after.
the F&T chairman got part of my allocation, I had to share with him, and it was friction. Now, I liked him very much, so we worked through it, but that'd be a bold move for Joe to say, you two scrap it out over this pot.
Yeah.
And it's not a fair fight, because Galvano,
More leverage.
But at the end of the day,
They should be like-
it's still X percentage of the total budget's gonna go to education.
Absolutely, right.
Period. And so if they get more, we will get less, because that total bucket's not getting.
right, well, no, but the fact they're splitting it is gonna hurt K-12.
Right, yeah,
The
but
fact that, see, my thesis would be, by splitting it, it means that David can't, if you want to say, do the right thing and take care of kids. Because Joe wants to
Correct.
help, he's going to split it out, and David is going to be left with a much smaller allocation. He'll go back, what you always do, and say, I'd really love to help you, but this is my allocation. No, I think it's a bad sign. That split,
Yeah, I agree with
think
you.
it's a bad sign.
And as we work on this, we certainly collaborate, see what we can do to address that.
But yeah, to that point, we really haven't had that. Yeah, the only thing that I think we've had is that, districts have their own specific asks that are sometimes different, specific things that you're looking for. But we haven't ever really had them where they oppose one another. The advantage that we see is that we have relationships with all those delegations, and so.
Put yourself in my shoes, you'd ask the same question.
Oh, sure.
Oh, no, I think it's a fair point, and I mean,
And that's
that's
another
what.
reason why we don't take on certain clients that compete with us as deliverers.
I was gonna say, I mean, we do stick in the public education, traditional public education school
no,
district,
I
well,
just-
for that point, because we wouldn't feel comfortable having to make a choice.
I get, good.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Jay?
No, that was my question.
Mr. Booth? Good? All right.
Just a question, you just mentioned something a moment ago, and I think I missed it on scholarships.
Gardner.
The Gardner scholarships and the allocation for best and brightest together is about $130 million, more or less. And they currently exist and reside outside of the FEFP. And we would like them, if they're going to stay outside of the FEFP.
Certainly.
Because the FEFP won't get bigger, they'll just consume that portion of the FEFP. And
But you don't feel like there's a risk of something like that happening?
there's always a risk of that, because that's the way to control the monster. Because these are monsters that will be insatiable. Gardner scholarships,
What is the Gardner, by the way?
it's essentially therapies, payments for therapies for kids
Okay,
who are
okay.
homeschooled
Homeschooled,
and who are
Gotcha.
exceptional. There's a great idea, there's nothing wrong with it, we don't find fault with it, that's not the point.
But
it's $80 million that we're spending on that.
And they've continued to expand
a lot.
the various problems that they'll
That'll
serve.
sit.
Yeah.
So eventually, the way to contain that is the same reason why you have a Group 2 cap on your FTE. Is you shove it in the FEFP and say, that total pot can't get any bigger, but when it's shoved in, there's not necessarily going to be $80 million added to the FEFP to pay for it. So, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon, since they named it after the recent Senate president, so we'd like to
Right.
keep it isolated from the rest of the operation. The upside is that's a lot of those kids are not registered in public schools and don't want to be asked to access it through the FEFP. They have to be, and they wouldn't want that. So that's some firewall there.
All right.
Another question, when we talk about 2017, the statewide system, that your wording, statewide system of approval of charter schools, statewide authorizer, what is it that you're seeing, expecting? What does the horizon look like with that? What do we need to know?
That has been a bill for the last couple of years, so mainly from the House. And so that is something that I could certainly see coming back and coming from the House. In the past, it's been the Senate that has been hesitant on that. But I will tell you, I mean, the charter schools that have funds and lobbyists are lobbying hard for that, because they know that more than likely, if they get that, they're going to be able to get through.
They're gonna get pretty much whatever they want.
And so the Senate has been more cautious on that, and I think if it were to come up again, that's where our efforts would be focused, would be on our senators to slow that down. I think it'll come up again. I mean, I think they're going to keep coming for it as long as they can. I don't see them giving up on that. Might be one of those, parent trigger situations that you just have to, that we work on and we work on from year to year to year, and then, maybe they take a break eventually, but I think it'll be back.
Sharing of the millage, I'm sorry, Tim.
No, you're fine.
With charters?
With charters.
And there's no doubt that that's a priority of the speaker, and he's not going to rest his speakership until he gets it. That's a fact. It'll be an all-out war. The Senate was willing to dance that dance, but then they put in place language last year that essentially said, you can do that, but if you're a charter operator, you're not going to also have a backdoor operation as a real estate developer where you develop the real estate, own it, rent it from yourself at rates higher than the market rate, and take money and put it both in the same wallet, which is exactly what's going on.
Yeah, that's the mechanism.
And that's exactly what Senator Gates opposed, and he made it very problematic, and that's what killed the whole thing. Now, Senator Gates isn't there anymore, but there may be some other folks who saw that the same way, could equally entertain that. The biggest problem that I see with that, among others, but one that always irritates me the most, is you raise that money as a total act of discretionary taxation on your part. You have to carry the duty to advertise and trim a tax increase when your tax base increases, even though your millage rate doesn't. You're required to have 2 hearings about that. You're the one who generates that money. They consider that state money because they authorize the millage rate in the Appropriations Act. Therefore, even though it's discretionary on your part, that's construed to be state money. You are restricted from building facilities with that money unless you can justify them based on capital outlay FTE. Because of the number of capital outlay FTE that migrated to charter schools, vouchers, and virtual school, you don't have enough growth to justify it. So if you wanted to build a new magnet school for whatever reason, up the road over here, over there, down there, over by Lake Nona, you would want it to be a countywide school of choice, and you'd want it to do this, that, or the other. You couldn't build that school, but you're going to then be required to raise the taxes and transfer the money to a charter operator who can then build that school without regard to whether it's needed. And we're building an infrastructure of 700 schools, the student stations for which are not needed, not owned by the public, but are paid for by the public. And that, to me, does not square with Republican fiscal responsibility. It just doesn't.
Well, the question then becomes whether or not it squares with it, and it's likely it will get approved.
Well, I think that one of our pushback points is that this is creating this excess need of inventory, and that if the state wishes to fund the development of a parallel school system as a priority, a compelling state interest to promote school choice, then the state should raise the taxes to do that.
But they'll deny that's what they're doing, even though that's what they're doing.
Yes.
The interesting, that's going to make this session so fascinating, is the Senate and the House have a lot of things they disagree on.
Yeah.
There's a
Yes.
lot, and some
Well, that's
big,
good.
and there's some
Yes.
big, but there's some big structural things they're disagreeing on. And so, in past years, you might have said, between Dean and Mike, or between Andy and Steve, yeah, this is a priority. Sooner or later, presiding officers are going to trade, and a presiding officer is going to get their way.
Yep.
In this environment, it's a weird year. I'm not saying it won't happen, but because the fact that it is Richard's priority may make it a chance. So I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but we are in uncharted
Well,
waters.
here's
Yes.
okay, that's a fair statement. Then, Mike, here's the wild card in all of this, which may not be an attractive question, but still a question. Where does Governor Scott fall into the mix? Because, he obviously carries some weight, and, if he is leaning towards A versus B, A will probably
Right,
happen.
so here's Rick Scott, because of his relationship with the legislature, he doesn't have great relationships with either chamber right now,
understand.
that he basically is left with one card, and it's the veto card. And so it depends on what's in that ultimate bill, if there's some goodies in there that he likes, because he'll only have one card to play. which is veto. And he's not afraid to veto things that presiding officers want. And so, Jay, it's completely possible they make this trade, they do what they do, and the Senate very savvily goes, all right, Richard, I'm going to give you what you wanted, knowing full well Joe's already talked to Rick Scott, and they know it's going to get vetoed anyway. So it's a weird game. Normally, what happens, Jay, is the House or the Senate tries to team up with the governor. One side or the other tries to have. That's how they win. Right now, nobody is teamed up with anybody, or the legislature teams up against it. There's always 2 against 1. This year, we're starting where there's no team up, and nobody seems to want to team up. It's a weird deal.
This is my prediction, then. My prediction is, whichever side, House or Senate, comes out in greater enthusiasm being pro-charter is the one the governor is going to team. I'm not saying that's what I'm for, but I'm reading the tea leaves. That's in my opinion what's going to happen. And then if something comes across his desk that is, deliberately and obviously pro-charter, it won't get vetoed.
Right. My point is the governor, unlike other past governors, the governor doesn't get a big seat at the table for the negotiation of what goes in it.
No, I get
He
it.
only gets to play
But they're
at
not
the end of
stupid.
the
These
thing.
guys aren't stupid. They want to get their things done.
Yeah, but the weird thing is this governor doesn't look like past governors where he really signals what he's going to veto. You don't know what Rick Scott may or may not veto. That's part of why he doesn't get to play in the legislation, because he won't show his cards, so nobody cares what his staff says, because they know you can do everything the governor wants in the bill, and he still vetoes it. Or you can do everything that he says he hates, pass the bill, and he doesn't veto it.
If the
It's
sports
weird.
book in Las Vegas had for the Florida legislature a pro-charter bill obviously not getting vetoed,
Okay.
I'd bet the farm.
It's a weird situation.
It is. There's also a chance it just doesn't even make it to the finish
Right,
line,
that's
given
the- right.
this weird
That's
situation
the best
too,
thing
you know?
we can, that's the best thing we can do.
That's what we were talking about that on the way down, sometimes we win when there's
Nothing
just
happens.
absolute chaos and
Right, but
nothing
it's always
happens.
hard to bet against Richard Corcoran, because he's so good.
But inaction is a win for us.
That's right, it is,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yes.
Dr. Pace, have we looked at the financial analysis and implication of something like this going through and laid out a plan of what that would mean for us?
Not specifically, we are certainly looking
I
at.
think we need to. I mean, understanding the landscape
Yes.
and knowing that the capital dollars are such an important piece of what we've been working towards and what we need in order to keep up with the type of growth we experience, I think we ought to run some analyses to figure out if this happens A, B, or C, what does it mean to us, so we can start.
That would also be helpful for us to use to talk to your delegations.
Yeah.
That's something I can't compute specifically individually, because I don't know things like your COPS commitments and your maintenance costs and so forth. And what we need to show is, what is it that you really have out there as free dollars, so to speak?
Yes.
Which are very limited
I've
at
never
best.
seen a financial metric you couldn't compute.
I just
No,
don't know. how to make it.
that would be really helpful, because to make the argument, if we can prove that it's going to be, the feeling is it's going to be terrible, and
No,
it
it's-
likely is, but if we have numbers that we can show in real,
No, we got-
this is
Well, and
really a
we
bad
need it, in
thing.
my opinion, we need it for two reasons. One, the legislative strategy side, and two is the fiscal responsibility.
So, yeah.
I mean, if we have an impending financial hit coming down the line to us, we better start talking about it, figuring it out. And when you think about the fact that we just got to the place where there's a potential for additional capital dollars for our community,
Right.
then only to be hit to have it completely go backwards on us.
Right.
Did we really take a step forward, or we take a step and a half backwards? So we need to understand what that's going to be. And bear in
Right.
mind that the public goodwill component of that is going to be important as well, because this school district has committed to our community what it is that we're going to be doing. And now all of a sudden we take a financial hit on the capital dollar side, even if we're not talking one for one, because I know we're talking about different dollars here. We need to understand that, because we don't want to be, 3 steps behind this thing, trying to catch back up and then talk to our constituents and saying, oh yeah, well, now we're not able to do this because we need money from this to cover whatever.
We're required to show the money.
Well,
It's not our decision.
Yeah, well,
It just kind of was done
But
to
that's
us.
not,
Yeah, no, that's-
but that's not how they're gonna do it.
They won't do
Right,
that.
right.
Tim, thank you. You still have the
I'm good.
superintendent?
Yes, or no, I'm good.
Okay, well.
Can I offer one piece of insight?
Actually, go ahead and just,
And just-
whatever you want to
I heard
add.
your discussion as we came in about your financial standing in the state and dollars per student and so forth. And I talked with Sarah some about it in the lobby. I would just say this to you. There are more important things to measure your standing in the state financially with than dollars per student. For example, and just bear with me a second to give you a couple of the reasons why
We
that's
welcome this. This is good.
that's not the best measure. There are some measures, but they're not the best measure. Among the districts, one of the ones that jumps right out at me is one of the highest dollars per student is Jefferson County at $9,064.41 per student. Jefferson County is currently in financial urgency. Its finances have been taken over by the state. It is flat broke and then some. I had to work with them with another consultant to be able to get them to make their October payroll. That's all public record, so I can say it. All of these dollars per students, if you're going to look at you and compare yourself, the first thing you need to do meaningfully is to eliminate all the small districts. And the reason for that is this. Last year, the digital classrooms allocation was raised from $250 to $500 by $20 million. $18.5 million of that 20 went solely to the $500,000 per district. It went up $250,000 a district as the base funding. So Jefferson County with 600 kids, 700 kids, gets that $500,000 that you do to start with, and that's like $1,100 a kid.
So basically, you're saying that there's some conflators.
Correct.
there.
That's right.
So
So
we
in
need
other
to go
words,
ahead. All right.
Jefferson can have
But we know how to
like
standardize
4
those things.
computers per
Yeah.
kid, but can't make payroll.
That's correct.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's correct. Calhoun County's got $7,800 a kid. You take that more or less $1,000 a kid that's in digital classrooms out, and they're like, just like you. The second thing that you can't really control is the yield from your discretionary operating millage, .748 mils. You are compressed, as is Hillsborough and Escambia and Santa Rosa and all the districts we work with, to the state average yield per student. But there are places that make a whole lot more than that. There's about $250 million in round numbers tied up in the compression adjustment that you participate in. And you yield, I don't know, 18 or $20 million out of that levy. But that levy yields $1.3 billion statewide. So there's $1 billion of that money you don't participate in on a per student basis. So that in the place where the governor lives, come on, man. Collier County. Collier County's got $8,200 a kid, and most of that is because their .748 mils is generating about $1,100 or $1,200 a student. And yours, even with the compression adjustment, is not going to get any higher than 480, and there's nothing you can do about that discrepancy. There are other things that are important. For example, when we looked with Sarah, your weighted ratio of weighted to unweighted FTE, which drives your revenue, is about 107.9%. You had 107.9% more weighted than unweighted FTE. Up the street in Orange County, that is about 111%. If you had the additional 4% weighted FTEs that they generate from the same student population, you would have about 2,800 kids times roughly $4,000 or $8 or $9 million more money, and your dollars per student would look just about like Orange County's does without considering the other stuff. So we can, and I'll continue to work with it because that's what I do, look at what the internals of the FEFP are that are driving your actual revenue and what things inside of here are meaningful. Another issue, $52 million of total revenue is for the lowest 300 schools. Do you know how many you have? Zero. Would you like some? I'd be happy to send them to you. Hillsborough County has 40, they're getting $9 million. Escambia County has 12 or 15, and some of them are just hopelessly deeply in disarray. They'd be happy to send you the money and the schools if you'd like to have them. But that's $52 million again that you don't participate in, so your dollars per student of that $52 million is zero.
That's just like saying, I want to become a Title I school if you're not. I mean,
Right.
it's the same thing.
So the point is, if you're looking for where you stand fiscally in the state and so forth, there are certain things you can do internally in terms of how you claim your FTE, how many kids you're getting through the AP test process and things like that that are both good for your kids and good for your bottom line.
But Jim, the part, and I don't know whether you were here, that intrigued me were things that the superintendent was talking about, where we're not getting reimbursed for students because they weren't part of our initial calculation. And
Those are issues.
Those are things that I think, those are targets of opportunity.
Yes, they are, but that still relates to the same issue. Your weighted FTEs were decreased because you were over cap, and I don't know why that's the case, but we can pursue that even with the staff in terms of how the language works in that regard. And that's the reason why you have 107% instead of 111% weighted ratio, weighted to unweighted FTE. And that's the same cost driver or revenue driver we're talking about. And I'll talk some more about with Sarah to get some real particulars, and we'll pursue that in the session when they start really looking at what's inside the internals of the FEFPR.
Well, and thank you, and please do. I know on the break, that's one of the things I grabbed Sarah on as well, and I said there's other variables that we need to break down, and she started sharing with me some of what you two were talking about briefly in the lobby. And that's exactly what we need to do, and it's really kind of my earlier point at the very start of our meeting this morning, is if we're going to have conversations about money, and we're saying we need money, we need to really understand what we're saying, and we need to really compare an apple to an apple.
Correct.
And we need to make sure that they're both Macintoshes.
That's
that
right.
we're not doing.
Tim, that's whether the three things that I've asked from staff to pursue that. One was an analysis of why we are where. That was the first thing we need. We need that analysis.
Correct.
Then number two would be Jay's very wise point, which is how are we doing on administrative costs? Because that's just a bugaboo that gets legislators in a tizzy. And so we need those. If we're going to move forward to help you, we've got to have that.
Well, and one moment. Just my encouragement and my appreciation as well is thank you, and please, by all means, continue to do that work with and alongside of us, because you have a level of expertise that is very valuable to us, and we have very capable people here that, in my opinion, would very much benefit from the level of insight that you can bring to this conversation. We have to, in my opinion, really break all of this down and understand that at the most granular level, so that as we're building our case, not just for today, but for the next 5, 10, and 15 years, that we have a very good baseline that we're working from to begin to evolve this conversation. And we've got the right people, the right board, the right team members in place. So my ask is absolutely be available and a resource to our team.
I want to illustrate a point, just to reinforce some of the things that have been said.
I'll jump up and leave.
I've been, because of my longevity on the board, I've got institutional knowledge, which means you're old. But before I got elected, I remember when I was running in 2002, we had our legislative delegation of the county commission chambers, and we had a school board chair, very passionate, got up in front of the delegation and was saying, we need money, we need money, we need money. At that time, Dan Webster was the chair of the delegation. And our school board chair had our CFO with him up there. And I remember Dan Webster cutting off our school board chair saying, okay, I get it, you need money. How much you need, what's going to get, and he wasn't ready for a specific answer.
Right.
And I'll never forget that.
Absolutely right.
And that's when when I got on the school point, I made it a point to always know, what do we got, what don't we have, and if I need something, what do we need, why do we need it? And when I talk to somebody with my elevator speech who's a legislator, et cetera, I would have those answers.
Those are very, very important insights.
Thank you, Jay.
When I first started in this process in the late 90s, all the finance officers were involved in lobbying, and they all went there with the same notion. I want more money, and they would start to get back the question, well, how much and what for? And the answers were simple: as much as possible and for anything we want. And that's not acceptable. As deputy superintendent, I wouldn't hand out resources that way. You, as a board or superintendent, would not, and there's no reason to expect the legislature would either. They will not do that. They should not do that. And those are answerable questions. There are answerable questions as to what do you need the money for, and how much of it do you need. And when there was money, when we were on an increasing plane, and we addressed issues like that where there were real needs, and we had real answers to those real questions, we got affirmative responses. We got support from our delegation.
Well, they'd say, this is what we can do.
But I'm gonna put the code on Jay's thing, and is that, you know who was our ultimate champion on creating that high growth funding formula that made that happen and generated what, $60 million to Osceola County? Dan Webster. Dan, once we answered those questions, I was at that same meeting, Jan, I remember when Greer had his struggles and.
It wasn't Greer, it was David Stone.
Oh, you're right, well, I remember that, but the point is, once we actually got Danny what he needed, he was our biggest champion. No, if only the Senate if we had 5 more Dan Websters, right now, we'd be in great shape.
Lost Dan?
I'm just saying that your point is, not only do you need to be prepared, but once we were prepared and we got him the information, we had a lot of success from that same legislature. Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, well, listen, Jessica, Jim, Mike, thank you very much. I think there's anything further, because I already brought that up 3 times, so.
I would encourage these board members, use Jim Hamilton's a great, I'm not gonna Jim is a great resource. I found him invaluable over the years.
That was fast, by the way, that was really fast.
Someday, when I was talking to Jim, I don't know what.
I love your explanation.
Yeah.
Thank you for making the drive now. Thank
Oh, what
you.
does he want?
No, I'm glad.
Good luck, have fun.
I might want you to.